I work at a call center. I work the graveyard shift, the night shift at the call center. Now, it might not be the best job, but the amount I was getting paid was enough for me to get on with the job. There weren't many people working the graveyard shift, so the office almost seemed empty, and there was this weird sense of freedom that was there. The cafeteria was accessible, and we did not need to be lining up for a coffee. The shift was pretty boring, and I was just going through the job without any interesting happening there. Even the coworkers that I had were pretty boring. They were so immersed in work that nobody really cared to take a break and relax. And I was the only one who was pretty psyched all over the place, and the only place that I found the entertainment in the calls that came in. And I even tried to chat up with the people that would call me. I would often have conversations with the customers on the personal level, and it turned out to be beneficial for me since I was pitching in more sales and getting the most out of the products, and in return, my incentives were increased and I was making more money. The shift that seemed to be boring was now becoming interesting, and then one day, I received a call that would change everything. I had no idea what impact that phone call would have on me. It was a Monday night, and as anyone working will tell you, Mondays are mundane. I went into the office knowing that today might be just a boring day. It started out as the boring day. Nothing really was interesting, and even the people that I was on call were not interesting in conversation, and they were not to be blamed. It was the Monday. Monday is boring. I started the calls, and after 60 calls, I decided to take a coffee break. And after taking a coffee break, I decided to go on back at calling. But then, just 20 minutes after the break, suddenly there was a phone call on my set. It kind of took me off guard because firstly, I hadn't given the number to anyone, and secondly, we cannot receive calls on that device. So yes, I was freaking out about the whole thing. At first I thought that maybe it is the corporate probably warning me to not chat up customers, so I let it ring. There was no way I was going to pick up that phone. But it started back again. This time, I decided to pick up to not get into further problems. And then I picked it up. I was relieved that it wasn't the corporate. It was some woman, but the spooky part was that the woman was crying. There was gentle sobbing in there, and the woman was calling for help. So while on one hand, I was relieved that it wasn't the corporate, I was also freaking out about what the call was. And as I was about to ask away questions, the line disconnected. It freaked me out. I tried logging into the call chart to find out the ID on the caller, but there was nothing. And I wondered who would do such things. And there was this thought that what if it was just a prank call? And I thought about it and I just let it slide. But then, when it was just 2 hours in finishing my shift, the call came in again. And all the girl did was ask for help. And as I tried talking to her, it disconnected again. And it was all silent for a while. And then right when I was ready to leave, the ring came back, but this time I ignored it because somehow I thought it was just some idiot who was trying to prank me. I went back to my place and I decided to straight away doze off. But then the call came in on my mobile. I wasn't expecting any call. There was nothing that could have prepared me for this call. I picked up the phone and it was the same woman from work. She called in and was sobbing, and this time she spoke. And she said, "Is there anyone listening to this call? Please, is there anyone?" And as I said, I shouted on the phone, "Yes, I am here. Yes, talk. Why don't you talk?" I was annoyed by the constant calls, so I got annoyed and I had a breakdown. And the girl said, "Please help me. This man. I've been here for 10 years. This man." I asked her, "What man? What man?" And she said, "There's an oak tree, yellow mailbox, badly maintained rose bushes, a bald man." And I said, "These are just random words. What are you trying to say?" And she said, "You are near, and I can hear you." And I was just more puzzled than ever. And I tried looking on the internet, but all these things were just random words, and making sense of them was not very easy without any context. So I just slept, knowing that there isn't much I can do. The phone did not ring the whole morning and the afternoon. And then the moment the night came in, it started ringing. And the next she said, "Red light, bus 30, red light, bus 30, help, it's been 10 years. And I wondered what she was talking about. When I was about to leave the place, the HR told me that my shift has been changed from night to day, and I was so relieved. When I was on my way to the home, I saw the red light, and it reminded me of one of the clues the women gave me. I slept, put my phone on silent. I did not want to disturb myself with constant calls and hints of that woman, so I just slept. Then I woke up and realized that I had to go to the office. It was day, and I was late. It was the first time that I was getting out and catching a bus in daytime. And as I got out and went to the station to catch the bus, and when I boarded the bus, I realized I was on the bus 30. I had no idea that I was on it. And then as the bus started moving, I remember seeing the oak tree. And suddenly, all the things came to me, all the clues that the woman was giving. And then there was the house with the yellow mailbox, and I quickly realized what was going on. I asked for an emergency stop and stepped off the bus. I was standing right in front of all the clues that the woman on the phone gave me. And then there was this badly maintained rose bush. And then there was the final piece coming himself my way. As I stood in front of his house, a man came and said, "Can I help you?" And I looked at him, and I knew if I confronted him, he would realize I was onto him. So I asked him for directions instead, and then he pointed me to the way that I already knew, and the first thing I did was call in police and inspect. I waited for them and decided to raid in with them after, and turns out the man had been abducting girls and molesting them and murdering them. He was a sick serial killer, and he even had girls kidnapped, and I asked them if they found the girl he kidnapped 10 years ago. And then what the police told me shook me. The officer said, "The girl you are referring to is Michelle. She was the first girl she kidnapped, and sadly, she was the first victim he had. And her remains were found in his closet. Literal closet. But how did you know her?" And I replied in all the shock that I was feeling, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Just over 2 years ago, I picked up the most important fare of my brief career in cab driving, lost my job as a manager of a coffee shop I've been working for, and so, in order to pay rent, I signed up to Uber in order to make ends meet. At first, it was a real godsend, and I'll throw out a trigger warning for cliches before I give you the usual spiel of I was able to set my own hours, be my own boss, and meet cool people for a living. I know it's old news by now, but it's true. And considering it was something of an occupational low point for me, it actually wasn't that bad. But then I met Amy. Amy isn't this girl's real name, but by the end of the story, I'm sure you'll understand if I tweak the details to protect the innocent, so to speak. Amy was pretty at a 4-star rating tip, well, pretty much your dream passenger. But she was so much more than that to me, because I never hit it off so well with the girl in such a short space of time before. I started out with me asking out how her day was, after picking her up around 6 on a Friday evening. She was cheerful. She said she had an okay week. But since she was swallowing the frog, so to speak, by heading over to an ex place to pick up some leftover belongings, if she got it out of the way, then she could just enjoy the rest of her weekend without worrying about it. Yeah, I didn't know what swallowed the frog meant either, but according to her, it was a Mark Twain quote that goes something like this: "If the first thing you do in the morning is to eat the frog, and you can continue today with the satisfaction of knowing that this is probably the worst thing that will happen to you all day. Basically, get all of the terrible things done early so you can just chill for the rest of the day." I liked that idea, and that made me like Amy even more. We went from talking about our ex to talking about quotes we liked to literature and sports. It was a total scatterbrain conversation, but we seemed to match or complement each other at every turn. By the end of the ride, I had actual butterflies in my stomach, and when I promised to pick her up again soon if she ever needed a ride, she was like, "Why wait?" She tore off a piece of paper from her purse, wrote her number on it with some makeup stick, and then handed it to me. I felt like I was on top of the world. I really did. She was smart, funny, and incredibly cute. And for some reason, she seemed interested in me of all people. I was so excited at the prospect of taking her out somewhere that I had to refrain from texting her almost right away. You gotta play it cool, right? So that's what I did. I tried to keep my mind on work, let her do her thing, then maybe text her in the morning. But I couldn't even wait until then. When I finished my fares, I sent her a quick one to be like, just let me know when you're free for coffee over the weekend. Then I had some dinner, played some Xbox, then went to sleep at around 3 a.m. The next thing I know, I'm waking up to the oh-so-familiar sound of my phone vibrating against my bedside table. I roll over, open one eye, and see unknown caller on the screen, and the first word that pops in my half-asleep brain is Amy. What'd she be doing calling me from an unknown number once I already had her saved in my contacts? I don't know. But still trapped in my sleepy ignorance, I answered the phone expecting it to be her. I said hello? And I'm instantly hit with confusion when I hear a guy's voice on the other end. He addressed me by name, asked if I drive for Uber, and when I confirmed both, he tells me he's from the police, then asked if it'd be okay if he comes to visit me at home. Immediately I'm like, what's this about? And he tells me it'd be better if we just spoke about it in private. Now, I'm not an idiot. I'm also not particularly anti-cop, but I know way better than to talk to one without a lawyer present. And the only question was, if I broke some traffic law or something, why was the guy being so cagey about his reasoning for wanting to talk to me? So I pressed him like anyone would, and told them I'd really rather know what was going on before I agreed to meet. He sighs, then starts telling me how one of my Uber passengers have been reported missing, and that he was hoping I'd be able to help him with the investigation. I know this is stupid. In fact, in light of what I said about keeping my mouth shut, what I did next was titanically moronic, but I just blurted out, Amy. There was a slight pause, and the guy just goes, I think we need to have a chat, don't you? Now, 2 officers stopped by my place later that day. I just wanted to do everything I could to help. I remember sitting down, offering them some coffee, and then basically launching into a big tirade about how Amy had been talking about how the ride was to visit her ex. That maybe, just maybe, had done something to her. But bizarrely, the detectives didn't seem very interested in her ex-boyfriend. The person they seemed interested in was me. I remember the sinking feeling I felt when they asked if Amy got back into my car after her collecting her stuff. I told them no, that a round trip would have obviously made sense, but that she also might have wanted to talk to him, maybe get some closure, typical breaked up stuff. Then they asked if I could prove that she got out of my car, which I could. The best piece of advice I'd ever gotten was to get one of those dual dash cams, the kind that records both the inside of the car and the outside front. The good news was I had the footage on hand, proving she didn't get back in my car. The bad news was, believe it or not, it was at a battery. It was like a practical joke. I felt like against myself, and it would have been funny if the punchline wasn't me being put into cuffs. And I don't know if the cops thought I was trying to destroy the footage or what, but they grabbed the dash cam from me, told me I was under arrest, and literally, that was that. I knew all I had to do was wait for the camera to charge, and everything I told them could be confirmed. But God, man, sitting in that cell catastrophizing that the camera was broken, and then I'd have a murder charge pinned on me. It was without a doubt the most terrifying few hours of my life, and just when I felt like I was about to lose my mind with worry, an officer opened up the door and basically just told me, sorry about that, you're free to go. I was still trembling as they booked me out of there and asked me if I needed a taxi or an Uber, and those idiots didn't even give me a lift home. I was really, really angry about the police until I was asked to appear in court. After that, I understood why they suspected me. Amy's ex-boyfriend hadn't just killed her and disposed of the body. He'd come up with an elaborate plan to frame whatever taxi driver dropped her off. He played the heartbroken boyfriend, faked text messages, and even edited security camera footage, believe it or not. This all ended up getting used against him in court, but at face value, you could see why the police had me down as their #1 suspect. It was actually the ex-boyfriend that reported her missing in the first place. He called the police raid after he finished dumping her body in some random land out in the rural area, telling them some sob story about how they just had gotten back together, and she wanted to pop back to her place to pick up a few bits before being driven back. To be honest, It was chillingly well thought out, and I thought I had been grimly impressed if it wasn't for the fact that I was supposed to be the fall guy. Thankfully, he got life in the end. I didn't go to any more of the court sessions. It was just too upsetting to see Amy's family all torn up like they were, so I heard the rest through the local and national news. I stopped driving Uber after that, not because I was overly traumatized or anything, although I'd be lying if I said the whole thing didn't get into my head for a while, after more because I had a more decent job offer for a management position at a corporate office shop. I went to a few therapy sessions, which honestly really helped, because for a while back there, I weirdly blamed myself for Amy's death. But as my therapist told me, if it wasn't me, it had just been some other driver, and we can't just blame ourselves for facilitating what are ultimately the sins of others. The sandy beaches are not as calmer in the night as they are in the day. The night turns the beaches into something else, something nobody would imagine that it could be. The playful sand turns killer in the night. This happened when I was a teenager. My family lived at the beach house, and I had the closest view to the beach. I used to stand at the balcony and look at the beach, and in the day, it was occupied by the beautiful girls flaunting their erogenous bodies and the ripped dudes salivating over their own bodies. I used to witness this all from my house, and there were times that there were distress on the beach, since the part of the beach in front of my house was privately owned by my father. Trespassers were not allowed in there, but we weren't really very strict about that rule, so there were no immediate consequences that were waiting anyone. But then there are moments when things were not very easy, like the time of spring breaks. The spring breakers were the wildest bunch of all. They were a menace on the beach, and at the time when I was young, it felt like getting into those spring break parties. But then I realized soon that maybe it is not the best of all. This happened during the spring break when my sister had recently moved to college, and it was the first spring break since then. She was back at home, and we would spend days in that balcony looking at these spring breakers. And then my sister said, "These spring breakers are ridiculous. They will act in worst way as possible." I didn't believe her at the time because that was the lifestyle that I was looking forward to. I had no idea what college kids were up to. And on the night when I was just waiting and watching things happening at the beach, and there were some boys and couple of girls having a nice fire going on, and they were dancing and kissing, and then taking breaks from the kissing and dancing again. One of the boys saw me from the distance and asked me if I would want to join them. He shouted from the beach as he looked toward my balcony that faced them. I waved with my hand and then shouted, "I'm 15, there's time." And then they just smiled and waved, and I waved back. It was too late, and I was getting tired, so I decided to retire to my room and sleep. By the time I went back, there was just a boy and a girl on the beach. Everyone was gone. My sleep broke, and I got out of the balcony. And then I saw at the distance the boy and girl. I think they were kissing each other, or maybe about to elope because the way they were going on each other was wild. The boy was climbing over the girl and just kept on pressing himself on girl, and he just kept doing that. The girl wasn't really saying anything, so I wasn't really suspicious at first, and I kept watching. I just wanted to make sure I get the look of the boy in case things do go wrong. There were these loud grunting noises that the boy was making, almost like a middle-aged man would. And then, about 20 minutes on her, the man turned, and what I saw made me panic. When the boy turned to its right, he wasn't a boy, but rather different man with a mask on, probably in late 40s, and in his hand was the head of the girl. He took the head and kept it in the bag, and I was panicking, but I couldn't call for help. I was lying on the floor trying not to make a single noise, and from the tiny gaps of wooden railing, I saw the man keep the head in the bag and then turn the girl on her stomach, and he just left. The woman was lying there lifeless without a head. The next morning, the police, the Fed, the media, everyone arrived at the crime scene. Everyone wanted to know what happened. They were all baffled by the case. There was no evidence, no clue and witness, except of course me. And everyone was terrified. Even my parents were terrified, and they decided that they won't be sending my sister to college on her own, and that my father would accompany her there. It was a panic all over the town, with no idea as to who killed her. I didn't come out as a witness until one of the agents of FBI pointed out something. I looked at that agent, and I saw it in his eyes that he wanted to solve the case. So I came forward with whatever I saw that night on that beach. The body was lying face down, and there were no clothes on the body. It was a young woman. There were no signs of struggle seen on the body. It would have been easier to identify the woman, but to everyone's surprise, she was missing the head to identify. The body was headless, and after a sweep of the area, the head was not to be found. The police were baffled by the case, and everyone around the lines of beach was worried. There were no records of the woman, and no one could be found until the forensics would be done by it. I was new when I was assigned the case. I was a rookie, and they gave me the case. The case was not as easy as I thought it would be. It was the case with no clues, no evidence, and no witnesses. Or so we thought. The cops were quick to suggest that we should close the case. I knew there was more to it. And with no certain suspects, I can be largely assumed that the perpetrator might do again what he did here. But there was the question of if there was any witnesses or not, and the police was quick to close the case and recorded that there was none while it wasn't the whole truth. There was no witnesses on the location, but there was in the distance. Across the sand from where the girl was murdered, a set of footprints went straight toward the beach house in the distance, and though the winds had broken most of the trail of it, I narrowed it down to the beach house. I entered the beach house and the woman answered. I wanted the whole family to be here, but she said that the father was out taking her daughter to the college dropping her off, and it was just her and the son there. That is when I asked whose room is closest to the balcony, and she told me that her son's room opened right into the balcony. And there it was, our first witness, her son, who might have seen what happened that night. Even though the murder was late, there was some answers that the boy could have given. And then the boy came out, and I asked him about everything, and there were details that he added that meant great deal to the case. I took the sample of the fingerprints of the kid without them knowing. The kid said that the last drink she took was from the boy in the spring break party she was in. I rounded up the forensic reports, and they said that the girl was sedated before being murdered, and that added to the story of the boy about the girl not screaming when she was being murdered. I decided to canvass the place of crime again to get something from there, maybe an evidence that we might have missed. And I was sweeping the place and then noticed something out of the ordinary. I checked for the tides on that night, and turns out they were higher than the usual, and that there was the bleak chance that the evidence may have moved from there because of that. That meant she has good enough chance that might not even be the real place of the murder, and the body could have easily been brought by the waves. I went back to the beach house and called in the boy and asked him to place the girl exactly where he saw her. It turns out was give or take around 20 yards away from the actual position. This time, I met the father of the boy and had a conversation with him, and he said he had no idea that he witnessed anything. I went on to visit the actual place of crime, and there I tried sweeping again for the evidence or just some sort of clue, however little it might be. About an hour later, I did find one. It was a tiny piece of Velcro strap buried in the sand. The night winds must have done it. I decided to give it for examination. They had the prints, but the prints were not in the system, and just because I felt it in my gut, I asked the team to match it up with the fingerprints of the kid. So they did, and turns out it was a match. It was the prints of the kid on it. The information was kept quiet and took the piece of Velcro and decided to head to the beach house. This time, the father said that he didn't want us to bother his kid no more, but I had to. There was the missing link that the kid knew. I had solved the case already, but there were missing pieces only the kid could have told. I showed the Velcro strap to the kid, and the kid said it looked familiar to the Velcro strap that his father's bag has. We still needed solid evidence against his father, and then I decided to pull something that I never wanted to, but I had to. I openly arrested the kid in front of his family, and they were bewildered by it. The man was angry, but what I did, and I told him that there was evidence and his prints that linked him to the murder. And then I told him that the head was found in his room in a bag. And as I said that,
I observed the man, and he was looking at the basement and was awfully quiet. And then I asked them to let me check their basement. And as soon as I did that, the man made the run for it. He caved under little pressure. He ran, and the team was waiting for him outside. And then there in the basement, there was the bag in which the head was kept. Upon further investigation, that man disclosed the location, and when he arrived, there was not one, but rather 4 heads in there, and one of them of his own daughter that he was supposed to safely drop off to the school. The very first case was one of the most sinister cases that I got to work on, and I still to the day think about that family and everything the mother and the son would have gone through after that evil was exposed.
After passing out my flight school, the first thing I did when I was out was trying out for the different driving academies to work as the instructor. I wasn't really into driving for airlines. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. But I somehow managed to not be in the National Air Force School, but instead, I was stuck with Commercial Airlines School. And as soon as I was out of the school, all I did was look for academies to train the new fighter pilot. I went to the school, and they told me that I cannot really join the academy until I have the in-flight experience. That means for that I had to join one of the airlines and get the flying experience. I did apply for all the airlines here, but none of them called back with my answers. So instead of waiting with nothing in hand, I decided to apply for the international airlines, as the domestic ones weren't really taking their time with the applications, and I didn't have much time. I was getting impatient. I wasn't going to spend my year doing nothing after getting that license. So the first company that agreed to it, I took its offer. It was Vietjet Airlines. I was going to be a pilot for the Vietjet Airlines, and even though it isn't something that I had planned on doing, the gig was paying me really good, and by really good, I mean more than 6 figures, and I was pretty impressed by all the accommodations that came with it. And I decided that I might just do it for as long as I can, and gather a good retirement fund for myself. My first flight was pretty easy. It was all the way to India, and it was pretty basic stuff. And then come back, and I did. And as I did, it felt pretty great to be up in the air and using everything that I had learned in real life. And most importantly, the fact that people in the plane looked up to me while getting on the plane and while getting off the plane. It was a special feeling that I wasn't considering could change the way I was feeling about the job. I started out as the co-pilot to the senior pilot Alex Rios, and around in 6 months, I was given a route in command and began the pilot doing the frequent trips, and most probably the longest trips anyone ever did in the Vietjet Airlines. I was becoming a valued pilot, mostly because I was working towards the fighter license, and getting as much as experience was something that was making me work harder. One morning of June on a summer day, I was about to make a round trip from Vietnam to Russia, a non-stop flight and then getting back. The arrival to Russia was quite bumpy because of the terrible weather we just witnessed there, and getting to the airport was something that we had to get into with careful navigation. We were almost blind because of the snowstorm of the Russia, and we had to even announce that it will be a bumpy ride. And I could hear from the cockpit that there was a bit nuance in there, so I announced again, hoping everyone was seated. Wouldn't want anyone get injured on my watch. So after everyone was seated, I decided to carefully go in for the landing, and just a little delay, and the moment I landed safely on that ice strip and I had to announce that we had arrived, and it was a great feeling to see that the passengers were so glad that it safely landed, for when they looked out of the window, they couldn't see anything, and they really appreciated that we landed. And I could hear the sound of the applause, and it was a great feeling, and I was feeling it for the first time. And then, we didn't really have much time to spare before our arrival starts, so I just grabbed my cup of coffee while the crew looked over the plane, and then met with the technical guys who were telling that ours will be the last plane to depart from here. They were going to close the station for another month, as the snow was taking its toll on the airport, and it wasn't easy to take in more flights, so they were shutting it off. It was really weird to be the last flight, and to me, it felt like there was responsibility on my shoulder of some kind of it. So I had to make sure the flight goes in safe. So as everyone boarded the plane, I told them all to buckle up and informed them firsthand that it is going to be a bumpy and last ride from this airport, And since the weather isn't very good outside, everyone should get their seatbelts up and be really calm. And I started the takeoff, and slowly and smoothly, it went one without a bump. Since the takeoff was something that went smooth, I wasn't really worried about the rest of the journey. Around 2 hours in the journey, I could sense some disturbance taking place in the left engine of the plane, and that meant there could be heavy turbulence in there. And then I decided to go by the book, making sure that the plane remains stable in case we lose the left engine. And then I heard a faint sound. I know it is hard to believe that I heard a sound coming from outside of the plane, but I guess it was that or some intuition. I told everyone to hold on tight and get their seatbelts right. I knew the plane is going to be a bumpy ride, so I make sure it does not lead to something drastic. Everyone was buckled in, and the hostess were all set in, and we started, and I was manually keeping an eye on the left one. And then, just when I took my eye off, the right engine just exploded and started falling apart. I wasn't hoping that would happen, and people were freaking out. I knew that I didn't have the left for very long, and it will go down. So I had no option but to land the plane as soon as possible. If I didn't, the alternative would be even worse. And then I saw the fire building up on the right side, and I decided without caring much to drop the plane and land it. We were practically out of options and flying blind, so I had to make this tough decision. And we started our descent, and I announced, "It has been a great honor to fly with you guys. You people are brave and deserve all the applause. We are going to make a possible crash land. Please put on your life jackets," and as the oxygen mask dropped, I could hear there was a panic back there. We chopped the snowy winds as the heavy plane was setting and brushing through the forest. We were losing the plane, and by the time we stopped in the middle of the forest somewhere in Asia, I had a relief that at least it is not the people we lost. Every single passenger was unharmed in that crash, not even a scratch. We were stranded in a place we had no clue about and no idea on how to get out of that place. Well, that is a story for another time. I started my career at Walmart from cleaning the aisles and arranging stock, and then slowly moved my way up to becoming the manager at the Walmart. I was told that I will be managing the new Walmart at a local town in Arkansas. I was pretty excited about the job, and I wasn't aware of the locality or the city people, but it was a massive pay hike for me, and even more, the company was providing me good insurance and housing facility, so I wasn't the one to pass on such wonderful opportunity. I was aiming for the corporate office to be the next thing for me. I knew in order to move ahead, the corporate office is going to be the next big thing for me. The new job was pretty easy for me because I was managing the place, and instead of taking orders, I was giving them. The house was pretty big, and I was quite sure that it is going to be an easy run for me. My day-to-day job was managing the employees, and at the end of the day, I was to check in the registers and gather the team up to discuss things about the accounts and plan things out for the next. So by the end of the night, I was the last one to leave the building. Good thing that the company gave me a car, because there was no such thing as public transportation in that place. Even though the town wasn't very big, traveling from one place to another could get very strenuous because of the place being dark and covered with mostly forests. So a car was much help. And since I was the one to close the place at night, I was the last to leave the building. First few months, I never really noticed anything strange about the place. But then one day, it all started to come in right in front of me. I started noticing details that I wouldn't rather do. There was this weird freakiness in the parking lot of the Walmart. It started when I was late one night for the closing of it, and there was a figure right around the corner where the parking ends. I looked at it and said, "Sir, the store times are over. Please move away from the spot." And as I yelled it across the other side of the parking lot, the voice replied, "All right, I'll be out of your hair in a bit." And I didn't really make much of it, and I left. I came back the next morning knowing that there was a man there lurking in the corner. I decided to go check the corner out to see if anything is out of the ordinary, and there was nothing, so I figured the guy must have left or something. The day went by smooth. There were no problems. The day went on without any issue. And then, as the night came in, We discussed the plan matched the sales, and I was the last as usual to close in the door and lock in the facilities. And as I walked downstairs, I saw that the same figure was yet again lurking in the shadow, and yet again I said, "Sir, the store times are over. Please move away from the spot." And as I yelled it across the other side of the parking lot one more time, the voice yelled yet again, replied the very same thing as yesterday. "All right, I'll be out of your hair in a bit." It was all very weird, but I think I was still not bothered by it a lot. It kept happening almost every day now. I would open up and nothing. During the day, nothing. And as the time got by and the evening set in, I waited for everybody to leave. And as I closed the door and decided to move on to my car, I once again saw the figure hanging out by the parking lot. And then it wasn't just one person anymore, it was two of them. I was becoming a bit of a habit for them, so I decided to change it and walk over towards them to make them stop lurking around in shadows in the corner. It is not very legal, and they can be held liable for the things they do in that corner, which was the property of Walmart. I approached them, and as I kept moving, the figures were getting dull and hazy, until I reached the very place where they were, and then they disappeared right in front of my eyes like they were never there. The thing that just got weirder, and then I moved back to the car and they were back. I was puzzled, and from across I said, "Guys, don't fool around too much." And the voice came back and it said, "Don't worry, Stuart, we'll move." I left at first. I thought I was being played and I realized they knew my name, so I figured maybe it is somebody from the office. So I decided to confront them in the store the next morning. I called in the meeting and asked them about whoever hangs around the spot after the Walmart is closed, and everybody said they don't hang around after the work. I asked Juan to check in the cameras and said that no one had been in that spot for weeks other than me just last night. I was puzzled by it all. Being in a new city and knowing nothing, I decided to ignore it and not dwell in the matter for long. I wanted to make sure that I am not the only one seeing this, and this time, I decided that Juan will close down the store with me, and I agreed to drop him off at his house, which was 6 miles away from home. We went back, and there it was, the two shadows standing right in front of us. I looked at Juan, and Juan looked right back at me. I asked him if he is seeing the same thing that I am seeing, and he agreed, and remembered whatever God he believed in. He looked at me with a chill and said, "That could be shadows, sir. Anybody's shadows. Let us just leave before it harms us." I told him to calm down, and we got in the car and started driving away. Then suddenly a large thud was heard over the roof of my car, and I thought maybe something fell over us. I got out. There was nothing. I sat back in and saw the shadows were running towards us, and as I got in, one freaked out and jammed his leg right into the driver's seat and jammed it out with full power on the accelerator. And I remember I wasn't even settled and I was just half in when he did that. The car went blazing into the wall, and last thing we would remember was trying to get out of the wrecked car. I got out of the car, and then I saw that I was in the exact position I was where the shadows were. I was bleeding all over, and Juan had his neck broken. And then we looked into the distance. There was a shadow, again across the parking. And then it struck me. I was the shadow. It was me, the shadow was me, leading to my death. I realized it was death when even after the car wreck, nothing happened to us, and there was no pain that we felt. 'Cause no matter we try, we were just stuck in the loop of the circumstances that led me to death. I was the shadow of my own death. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. This happened about 4 years ago. I was 20 at the time. The first time I met the guy who would become my grocery store stalker. He was standing outside the store collecting money for the Salvation Army Christmas time donations, a fairly friendly person. So I like to say hi to people who work at places I frequent to be nice. This guy was a kid around my age, very tall with a mild resemblance to Lurch from the Addams Family, dark circles under dark eyes, short black hair, and kind of vacant look in his eyes as well. I chatted with him for maybe 2 minutes, just idle chit-chat about the weather and whatnot. Nothing particularly memorable or interesting, and then waved goodbye and went home. Little did I know that single moment would be the start of something that would have me genuinely afraid. About 4 or 5 months passed and I hadn't seen him again. Then one day, as I was grocery shopping with a friend, when as we were chatting, she suddenly got really quiet and kind of recoiled backward, looking behind me. I turn around to see this guy, who had to be at least 6'4", towering over me, not 8 inches from my body. He said hi and told me he remembered me from the December I had talked to him, and then asked for my number. I, being young and never having experienced this type of interaction before, told him I didn't have my number memorized, but that I would write his down and text him later. I kind of have to wave my phone at him, pointing out me at the time boyfriend whose picture was my wallpaper, making a point to say, "Oh look, that's my boyfriend," to the guys, hoping he would clue in. But no luck. He told me his number, which immediately upon getting, I blocked, with not letting him get my number. However, would mean my blood run cold was what he said after I put my phone away. He leaned in real close, and in a low voice he told me, "Whatever I text you is for your eyes only." At this point, I started to feel genuinely uncomfortable. I responded, "Yeah, sure, nice talking to you, but we gotta get back to shopping." And I grabbed my friend and dragged her off, shooting a panicked look at her and asking why she didn't bail me out. Apparently, her scared her with her getting so close to me, and she didn't know what to do. I'm gonna make it clear, I'm not exactly a small girl. I'm 5'8" and solidly built. I can certainly handle myself, and I very rarely feel intimidated or small in the presence of anyone, male or female. But this guy made me feel tiny and scared. In the months that would follow, he would make me feel truly frightened. I had hoped that creepy interaction would be the last time I saw him, but that was unfortunately not the case. After that initial meeting with him saying that creepy thing about his text being for my eyes only, it seemed like I would run into him every single time I got to that store, no matter what checkout lane I was in. He always seemed to appear at the end of it when I was finished shopping, and every time I was in the store, I would notice him out of the corner of my eye, watching me, no matter what area I was in. One time, I even caught him following me out to my car. At that point, I got scared and decided to say something to the managers. After letting the managers know what was going on, they assured me that they would tell him to not talk to me. After that, he wouldn't speak to me, but I would continue to see him following me around the store at a distance every time I went up there. It got so bad, and I felt frightened that I started to be afraid to go to the store at all. But I'm one of those stubborn people who refuses to be intimidated by someone to the point, don't stop doing something. I had hoped that maybe it was a coincidence that he was following me. After all, it was a big store. Maybe he just had things to do that just so happened to be in the area that I was shopping in. So I started to pay close attention to my surroundings. Once I started paying really close attention, I realized that every single time it was up there, I will constantly notice them in the areas of the store I was in. During my last encounter with him, I went up to the store to grab just 2 or 3 items I needed for dinner that night, and I first saw him standing outside the store when I got there, and with his back to me, I quickly ran inside, hoping he didn't see me. Unfortunately, a few minutes later, I saw him at the very back of the store and items in hand. I immediately made a beeline towards the door. As soon as I got near the checkout, I ducked behind one of the shelf displays and watched carefully at the front of the store to see if the creeper would appear. And he did. I watched. He looked up and down the checkout, and when he didn't see me there, I saw him step outside. At this point, I quickly ran into the nearest open cashier, rang up my items, and stuck my head out the door to look for him. I didn't see him anywhere, so I started trying to make my way back to where I parked.
I parked away a ways to the side of the store where a bunch of other small stores and restaurants were lined up, and as I was walking towards my car, I realized I saw him standing by the entrance that I had first entered the store through and ducked behind the pillar immediately, hoping he didn't see me. I watched carefully from behind the pillar, and as he scanned the parking lot, he obviously couldn't find me. After a minute or two, he started walking out towards the direction of the parking lot in front of the store, and so I took that opportunity to make a run for it to my car as soon as he was far enough away that I felt safe. As soon as I got into my car, I locked the doors, and to my horror, when I looked up, he was standing there, about 15 feet away from my car, with a shopping cart in front of him. I knew that he followed me. He knew I knew. I fully believed he had chased after me, and when I made it to my car, he grabbed the nearest car to make it look like he was collecting them from the parking lot, and I just remembered feeling absolutely terrified at that moment. I went home and immediately told my grandfather what had happened. I began crying and shaking, and my grandfather told me to get in the car and we were going to settle this. He and I drove up to the store in his car, and he walked me into the store and demanded we speak with the managers immediately, both of them. When the managers arrived at customer service, he asked me to tell them what had been happening and demanded that they ensure he left me alone or that he would involve police. The manager swore up and down that they would take care of it. As far as I know, he wasn't fired immediately because my friend who first encountered him with me when this whole thing began told me that she had seen him from time to time when she was still there by herself, but that any time I went with her, she would never see him. I fully believe he knew whenever I was there, only this time instead of stalking me, he would avoid me. Eventually, everyone who knew the situation stopped seeing him there, so I think he may have gotten fired and moved out from the store. Either way, I haven't had any issues since, but I never in my life felt so afraid of another human being as I did that day. Seeing him make eye contact with me in the parking lot has unlocked my car doors. It still creeps me out to think he was watching me so closely every time I entered the store, and that he could so easily avoid or follow me whenever he wanted.
From 1998 to 2001, I lived in a small craftsman-style home in Laurel Mountains, not too far from Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. The home had a twin next door that was built at the same time, but by the time we bought our place, the one next door had been remodeled and expanded so extensively that it was unrecognizable. The story goes that the property belonged to two brothers, and the brother whose house ended up getting a makeover had two sons. But here's the fishy part, which I personally don't buy. Our neighbor in the other house told us that the two boys were werewolves. I didn't know this part of the story until my husband told me later on, after we both had experienced some strange things, which I will elaborate in a moment. When he told my husband about this, he invited him in for a tour of his home. And during the tour, he pulled back the carpet to show my husband a stone pentagram, which was built into the slate of the foyer and the floor. Another fact that was not related to me until later. A month or so passed and we got a really sweet rescue dog, a Sheltie, and she was perfectly friendly, normal, and protective over my 7-year-old daughter. But over the following months, she started doing some strange things. I get up in the middle of the night to find her growling down the stairs at something. And during the day, as I was watching TV or something in my studio, I'm an artist, she would stand between me and the door to the dining room and growl for an inordinate amount of time. Over the months, she began to get a little unpredictable too. She would wet on the carpet, which she had never done up to that point, and eventually she would bite me. By that point, I was pregnant and scared to have a biting dog around a baby. so I took her to the ASPCA. During my pregnancy, I started sleeping in another room away from my husband as he snored like a freight train, and it was hard enough to get rest being big and pregnant. When one night, I woke to something crawling up from the foot end of the bed and over my feet and legs. I couldn't see anything now and was so terrified that I couldn't even scream. I was able to put a hand up and grab the headboard. This was an old, rickety double bed that my mother-in-law had given us for our spare room and slammed it against the wall repeatedly. With that noise, I was finally able to scream, and whatever was on my legs disappeared. I ran to the hall to find my husband running to meet me and asking me what had happened, and I didn't know what to say. That winter, a few months after the baby was born, I was sleeping in the room with the baby who was in his crib, and my mother was visiting. We'd all be enjoying an evening in front of the fireplace, and the whole house was warm and toasty. When we went to the bed late at night, probably around midnight, I woke at 2 a.m. to the baby screaming, and when I tried to get up, I was so ice cold, I could barely move. My mom and husband heard the baby screaming and came into the room to see what was wrong. Then my husband said, "Why the hell is it so cold in here?" The door was open the whole time, by the way. So my mom took the baby out of the room and my husband helped me out to the hallway beyond the open door, and the rest of the house was still toasty warm. Thank God we ended up moving out the following summer. But before we had, my husband said he'd spoken to the neighbor about our experiences, and he said, "Oh yeah, the two werewolf boys' father had killed them, and then himself, and the boys' ghosts roam the two properties."
Years ago, man, I'm old, but let's say the mid-1990s. I worked as a woodland firefighter while in the Army Reserves. I worked as a spotter, basically being stationed in a giant fire tower in the middle of a national park. My job was just as it sounds. I would use binoculars and look out for fire smoke and other telltale signs of fire. My nearest compadre was 5 miles or so from me. My days consisted of working my shift, taking long walks around the fire tower, being on the lookout for anyone who might be having illegal fires, looking out for wildlife, and staying afoot of bears and wolves. The way our shifts worked back then was 1 week on, 1 week off, so we slept in the towers and cooked our food, etc. One day on one of my tracks out for food in my Jeep, I came across an illegal bear trap. I had several ranger friends with me, and I safely set off the trap, then picked it up to take to the ranger station. Poaching is illegal in the park, and carried a big fine even back then, and some jail time. But it didn't stop the poachers from trying. I heard rifle shots and headed back for my fire tower. And we did have a rifle in the tower, but only to be used in case of emergency. A few months back, a fellow spotter had been mauled to death by a grizzly, so each tower had been outfitted with a rifle. I looked with my binoculars but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. So I radioed my coworker Ben, who was an older guy in the adjacent tower, and he hadn't heard anything but had come across a few traps himself. That night, after dinner of frankenbeans and toast, I was riding to my future wife when I heard the rumbling of a truck, thinking it was maybe Ben. Occasionally he made the trek over and we would crack open a soda and chew the fat for a bit. It wasn't. Instead, I saw 4 men with rifles get out of the truck, one looking around and leaning up against the truck, whilst the other 3 grabbed traps and began to set them. I grabbed a rifle and my lantern and headed down the stairs. I was only 21 at the time, a farmer's son from a rural Virginia farming town, and even with 1 deployment behind me, I was naive. I should have called it into the Rangers, but instead, I thought I could talk some sense into our 4 dangerous men. I barely got a "hey, what are you doing" out of my mouth before I was roughly shoved by bare hands. My lantern fell, and I heard it crack. Then my rifle was kicked away from me. I felt the breath leave my chest when I was violently kicked in the stomach. I barely had caught my breath when I was grabbed by two of the men and was shoved forward into the woods. It seemed like we walked for miles, but in reality, it was probably only a mile. However, I noticed that there was no sounds in the forest, and it is rarely silent. It's usually a cacophony of sounds, even at night. Owls, wolves, and crickets. But on this night, nothing. Suddenly, I was shoved onto my knees, and I felt hot tears well up. Thought of my parents, my little sister, brother, and my fiance who were back home in Virginia. When I heard the rack of a gun, I shut my eyes and prayed. Then suddenly, the night erupted. But it was the sounds of sirens, those of forest rangers, and behind them in his pickup, Ben, who had tried to radio me that he had heard a car's engine and come to my tower when I hadn't replied. The poachers were arrested. Ben drove me back to the tower, and I was still shaking. He didn't lay into me for not following the procedure, but just said that it was a close kid. I ended up leaving the job months later to take a job closer to home. But I never ran into any more poachers during the rest of my time. I kept in contact with Ben for a while and sent him a wedding invite and a photo of my firstborn son in 1997. However, as time usually does, we lost track of one another. And a few years back, I Googled him to discover he'd passed away a few years back. He would have been 75 or so. I don't know whatever came of those poachers, but I know I never want to meet them again.
My father was in Army, and being a brat of Army, you have to travel a lot, and that means going from one place to another. And it was the new house, always the new houses that we would move to. And the thing with new houses is that it brings in new stories, and new stories, some of which are good, and some of which are really bad. And by bad, it means the horrible bad. I was in high school when Father had to move to France. He was in the Strategic Investigations Department or was on a classified mission somewhere. What it meant was being at home alone. And being in the home alone is something that I really like. But sometimes it gets too much because most of the new houses that you are in are sometimes haunted. I'm not even kidding about the part of the new house being empty. But one day, there was something much more worse. I was back at home from the new school I was in. France was especially difficult. I barely knew the language and I had no friends here. I got back from the school and I was already late. I cooked myself a meal and then decided to watch some television. As I switched it on, everything was in French, and television was something that I had no interest in then. I waited a while, did my homework, and decided to spend the evening out in the city market, looking out for things. It was then that I decided to catch a cup of coffee and probably a croissant. I got the croissant and went to roam around the city. I was roaming around when I watched the poster for what it said was a freak show, and I decided to enter. I had no idea what it was, but I naturally assumed that it was a freak show, a circus type thing, and I entered. And it was too frantic an entry, and I paid them $1 since it's all I had. So I sat inside, and the seats were made of the wooden board, and there was a center stage. And then after music, a clown appeared and brought glasses of what he called the magic tea for everyone in the audience, and he handed me one, and I took it too. I drank it. And as I was drinking, the first act was the one of a magician. And he said, "For now, the magic is here. I need someone to volunteer, and we will get into the mind of that person, and through his mind, look into the house and things he owned." I remember I raised my hand. I had to. I was new, I barely understood anything, and I was the only one enthusiastic enough in there to raise his hand. And as I did, he called me onto the stage and sat me in the chair. I remember my leg was trippy when I was getting off from the wooden board seats, and then I decided to sit on the chair. And I remember the magician whispering in my ear, and you shall grant us pass to your home and look for things that we can take. And I remember in a daze I said, yes, I grant you the permission. And as he did that, I remember everything to be as light show of its kind, and there was this blurriness in the air. And then he brought out a television set, the LED TV that I owned, and then he brought out the PlayStation that I had, and after, the laptop and camera. He asked me, is there anything that I have of value in home? I was just surprised how he was able to bring out everything that I owned into my new house. And then he said, oh, you live in a new house, don't you? I was surprised by how right he was. I could hear the applauses all over. And then he said, your dad is in Army. And again, I was freaked out about the details he knew. And the trickiest deal he told me was the number of beers I had in the fridge. It was phenomenal. That evening couldn't be topped. It was surreal. I remember being very tired at the show and I dozed off. It was night. Thank goodness my father wasn't here or he would have been pissed. I think I slept right there at the wooden seats of the show. When I woke up, I found myself in my house and in my room, and my father was looking at me, and I knew I was in trouble. But it was a wonder. I don't know how I got there. He looked at me and asked, where's all our stuff? And I was confused at him. I thought he brought me home. And then he looked back with more aggressiveness and asked, where is all our stuff? I was confused and looking at his face, not understanding what he was trying to say. My father was not like every other Army sergeant. He was kind and sensitive. But today, it seemed as if he was serious. He asked me again, where is your stuff? And I was still not over the sleep. And then he silently went out and got back with a bucket of water and then poured it all over me and said, young prince, where is all our stuff? And then I recollected. And then he told me to get down there. I got down and he said, all our stuff is gone. The television, the PlayStation, and even the beer in the fridge. And then he said, what happened last night? Recollect it. Now I'm going to bring in the camera tape, idiot. And I went downstairs and saw that the house was completely empty and everything was gone. I was myself surprised. And when I saw my father coming back with the tape, I asked him, did you brought me back from the freak show last night? And he was as surprised and shocked as I was when he said, wait, you were out the whole night? He was in shock. And I asked him, you didn't bring me back home? And he looked at me and said, no, you idiot. I arrived this morning and saw that all the stuff was gone. The front door was closed shut without lock and you were snoring. And he looked at me with suspicion. He asked, are you on drugs? And I said, no, I'm not on drugs. And then he furiously, with the tape waving in his hands, asked, well, then why the hell do you not remember how you got back? And I was equally confused. My father had already alerted the authorities about the break-in, and he said, well, the people from the office will be here and will ask you some questions, so you better get your act straight, and let's check these tapes out. He took the tape and then looked at me and said, oh, wait, we don't have a television. I wonder how careless can you be? I snatched the tape from him and started walking. He shouted from behind, where are you going? I told him to just follow me, and he did. About a block away from where our new house was, there was an electrical shop, and I took the tape to him, and then we played the tape at the place. And what I saw next was placing the clues right in the time, and the blocks were filling up. I saw on the tape that I accompanied a group of freaks into my house last night, and they slowly took everything. The television, the laptop, the PlayStation, even the cold beers from the fridge. I still couldn't make sense of the things, and then I made him pause the video and zoom it. And then upon carefully looking at it, I saw what it was. It was the same magician from the last night. He was there along with the clown that got me that drink, and I even remembered the guy from audience. It was the freak show taking our things from our home. Then I realized I was the one who led them to my new house. And then it was all getting back to me, and the realization was pretty shitty. And then I recalled the events of last night, and I realized the drink that the clown served was the reason for everything that had happened. I was drugged by the clown, and then they looted everything in the name of magic. And I was too naive to realize that, but I did. I told everything to Dad. and then he with his resources tracked them all down. But my father asked if I wanted to press charges, but I didn't really want to. All our stuff was back, so instead I didn't see any point. These people could have been worse, but they were not, so I didn't do it. Well, the new house in France brought in a new adventure to me. Now that we are moving to another house, this time in Ukraine, I wonder what new adventure this new house will bring. The word was out about the night duty guard that the McAllister estate wanted. Nobody was taking them up for offer. I wonder why it was, so I decided to take them up on offer and decided to go in for the interview. I thought how terrible it could possibly be, and then my friend told me that the job is practically nuts. The whole family is pretty out of mind, and the night duty is especially tough since the estate is all covered in forest area that in itself is pretty dense, and most of them are afraid of that part. I decided to be up for the job. I wasn't missing the opportunity just because people were afraid of it. I set an appointment to meet them. I wasn't going to let this chance go for me. This could be the break for me to improve certain things in my life. I went to the appointment all dressed up and professional. Even though the job was very casual, I wasn't taking any chances with it. I went to the estate, and there was already a guard on duty. He greeted me and asked me what I was there for, and I told him that I was there for the night duty. And the guard smiled and said, "Well, good luck with that, my man." And as I walked in and I asked him, "Any tips for me to get hired?" And the man replied with a smirk, "Just be yourself, ma'am. You will get hired. You were the only one who showed up." And I looked at him and then walked away. As I entered the house, it was big, and it was one of those old houses with antiques, animal skin, and really big weird pots. It was one of those exotic mansions that people talked about. And as I entered, a woman came down. She was wearing a robe and came in and said, "So, you are the only one who dared to come in for the job." And I agreed. And then just minutes after that, a stern man came down from one of those stairs, making a dramatic entrance, and then said, "Well, young man, seems like you are the only one who is brave enough to be up for the task of night duty. Well then, very well. You will be paid $1,000 a week, and you will be wearing the tuxedo we signed for you, and your night duty starts at 8 and ends at 4 in the morning. If you have any questions, ask now." And I was stunned by the $1,000 per week salary. I was confused and completely in awe of the $1,000 thing. I wasn't going to mess this up by asking some stupid question. So I stayed quiet and agreed to everything. And I don't even know what he was saying. My life was just getting up, and up by a simple night duty. I was pretty excited for the job, and it was even cooler that I get to wear a tuxedo. They wanted me to join as soon as I could, and called me in the next night. But they wanted me to be at 7 the first day so they can tell me some ground rules about the place and introduce me some things that I need to know before starting the work there. Knowing the stature of the job and the money I was getting paid, I was sure to not be late the very first of day. The next day I woke up early and went that I had to be there even though it was so early. And I went there, and there was this intervention kind of thing where the owners were there and their children were there too. And they said, pointing at me, "This is our new night guard, and he's going to be the new night guard and help us with our mosquito problems." And I was wondering what he was talking about, and I just said, "Yes, sure." And I agreed to whatever he was saying. And then they gave me a wooden spear. I was wondering why they gave me that. And then they said in their posh English things that they were going quite over my head. "He will be slaying the mosquitoes that try to enter the mansion. Finally, a human useful for us." And I was just clueless and went on to take my post and just stood there on guard for an hour. I thought it was an easy $1,000 for me. But then about an hour later, there was this guy running towards me, and I had no idea who he was. I just stood there and stopped me, and he said that he did. I can see his teeth. They were really sharp, and he said, "Get out of my way. Those people need to be punished." And I asked him who he was, and he said, "I am Token. I am a vampire, and I hate these werewolves." I was just so confused. And then, as he was about to charge me, the son of the owner came in and stopped the attack and killed the Token. "It is all right. It's your first day, and Father has a habit of saying everything dramatically. So to clear up things, yes, we are werewolves, and no, we don't turn on a full moon. We control whenever we want to. Oh, And you have to stab these intruders with the wooden spear that we gave you. We all have to do our part. Vampires are quite filthy. They want to dominate things. So we need to control them. And I get it if you don't want to be a part of this. But you kind of have to, since you know our secret, and if you say no, we will kind of have to kill you. So you get where I'm coming from. I was completely in shock, and I had no way of how to react to that. And then another 2 months in the job, and after allegedly killing several vampires, I was really getting in with the family, and they were trusting me more than they ever could. My pay was increased from $1,000 to $2,000, and I was enjoying the lavishness it all brought with me. And I had my plans with everything. And then one fine Tuesday morning, after a thorough research and planning, I finally got what I wanted. The Tuesday morning when the family was all comfortable and the day was cloudy with no sun. And that is when me and the other guys invaded the house. And we killed the owners. Silver daggers. We used silver daggers. There is something about the composition of silver that is lethal to the werewolves. I got them to sign the deed of their wealth, and the vampires got freedom from all the constant hunting these guys were on. Both parties got what they wanted. I promised to keep my mouth shut about the vampire thing, and in return, I gave them a place that they all could just sit back and relax while enjoying the massive wealth. This story might sound absurd to you, but it all happened.
I'm an overnight security guard for a large building. Parking ramp is generally really a quiet job with a lot of free time. But occasionally, I do have to kick out some homeless people. It's a horrible part of the job, and I do my best to direct them to the next safest place to sleep. Most people are understanding because they unfortunately go through this a lot. If anything, they want to vent, and I tried to be an open ear. Our protocol is to ask them to leave, then if they don't, tell them to leave. And if all else fails, we have to contact the police. I've only gotten to that last step. It's important to note my general routine at work. I sit in a shack in the parking ramp for an hour. Then I go for a walk around the building and then back to the shack. The doors are all locked, but there's an entryway with an ATM that's open 24/7. This is usually where I find people looking for a place to sleep. For more context, I'm a smaller woman and unarmed. On this night, there was a woman trying to sleep by the ATM. I followed protocol, and after the first 2 warnings, I had to contact police. She yelled at me, which is out of the normal, but understandable considering her position. Must be frustrating being constantly kicked out of every semi-safe place. The police arrived, and because I was a little scared, I always am, I watched from inside the building out of view to make sure they got around. If she was yelling at me, she was full on screaming at them, and this went on for about half an hour before she left the building. Unfortunately, that's all the cops are required to do, so she made her way to the bus stop right outside. The problem with this is the bus stop is parallel with my shack. She was just sitting and staring at me with hatred in her eyes, and I got comfortable pretty quick. So I decided to take another walk. When I was passing the door that led out to my shack, I decided to take a peek out the little door window. And I don't usually do this, but I feel uneasy knowing she was probably still in the area, and it's a good thing I did. I could just barely see it, but behind my shack, I saw the slightest wobble. There she was, hiding right behind my shack. It's not a big thing, maybe a 10-foot cube made out of large window and metal right at the entrance of the parking ramp. I have no doubt she is waiting for me. I called the police again and just kept watching from the little door window. And while I was waiting, she eventually let out an angry scream, kicked the miscellaneous junk in front of the shack, and stormed up the stairwell into the parking ramp for an extra kick of anxiety. The floor above me had a broken door that wasn't locked at the time. Eventually, the police got there, and after some harsh words, they got her to leave again. And this time, she walked off into the night. What really scared me was what I found on my next walk. Now, there's a mirror next to the door I was watching her from. I couldn't see it from inside. But from this side, it was obvious. She had broken the mirror and a large piece was missing. Maybe I'd allow my anxiety to build all this up in my head, but from my perspective, she had taken a large sharp object hidden behind my shack and waited for me to walk up. You tell me if I'm overreacting, but to my nameless potential assailant, I wish you better times and a bed to sleep in. But I also hope I never see you again.
On the night of March 15th, 1989, Tracy Lynn Kirkpatrick was working at Alien Ladies Sportswear in Frederick, Maryland. Tracy was an introverted young woman, often opting to communicate her thoughts and feelings through handwritten poetry that actually verbally conversation. She was also something of a bookworm and excelled in her academic life. She was also extremely hardworking, holding positions to retail jobs in order to save money to pursue for a law degree at an Ivy League university. One of these jobs was at the previously mentioned sportswear store, where on the night in question, she was working the closing night shift at around 6 p.m. On March the 15th, Tracy's mother arrived at the store to bring her daughter some dinner. She was a supportive, loving parent who often brought Tracy a plate of home-cooked food, which Tracy would then share with her colleagues on duty. She later said that nothing appeared amiss at the store, and that her daughter seemed to be in a perfectly jovial mood. 2 hours later, Tracy's manager finished her shift and departed the store, as it was routine that lower employees would cash up and lock down the store at the usual closing time at 9 p.m. No sales were recorded after that point, so if there had indeed been any visitors, they certainly hadn't bought anything from any of the clerks. After closing, one of the unit's security guards, I happened to notice that some of the store's lights were on long after they should have been turned off. So at around 10:30 p.m., he entered the store to investigate the situation. Concerned there may have been an intruder who was using the lights to steal merchandise, having broken in using a back door, he took out his key to unlock the front entrance of the store, only to find that it was still unlocked. Deeply concerned, he thoroughly searched the front and back areas of the premises, only to make a terrifying discovery. In one of the back storage rooms lay Tracy Lynn Kirkpatrick. There was a puddle of blood beneath her unconscious body, along with stab wounds to her chest and back. The security guard then rushed to call emergency services, hoping she could still be saved. But on arrival, paramedics found that she could not be revived, and they announced her dead on the scene. Police then arrived to cordon off the area so that a forensic examination could be undertaken. Horrifyingly enough, Tracy's parents were also on their way to the store, concerned that the daughter was having car trouble and might need a ride back home. But when they arrived on the scene, they saw the blue flashing lights of police cars and feared for the worst. We cannot imagine how painful it was to have their worst nightmares confirmed that their only daughter had been murdered by some mysterious assailant. All throughout the investigation that followed, Frederick homicide detectives failed to identify any singular motive for her slaying. The cash in the store's registers was still present. Tracy had not been indecently assaulted, nor did she appear to have any obvious enemies who might wish to see her come to harm. There was no evidence of any chase or struggle, which suggested that Tracy knew her murderer as they approached to fatally wound her. Yet, not a single person working at the store that day had seen anything suspicious or could suggest anyone they thought to be guilty of such a horrific crime. Investigators were completely and utterly flummoxed. That was until 3 months later, when a person called into the U.S. National Confessional Hotline. A recording of the call was made, which reads as follows. "Hello, my name is Dawn. and I'm calling from Frederick, Maryland. I know this is going to sound surprising, but 3 months ago, I stabbed a girl to death. And you might think that this is making this tape, I'm setting myself up to be caught, but there are a lot of guys named Don and Frederick. The girl I killed was working in a ladies' sportswear store, often came by and talked to her when she was working alone. And one night, when she was in the storeroom, and we were talking, our conversation turned into an argument. And so I took out a knife with me I had at all times, and I killed her. And a few days later, I realized I had created a lot of sadness, and I thought about turning myself into the police. But whatever they do to me, they won't bring Tracy back. So I've decided that I better keep free, because we have the death penalty in Maryland. Thanks for listening. I'm sorry about what I did, but nothing can change it. Staff from the confession hotline forwarded a copy of the recording to Frederick Police. The call was traced back to a place called Walkersville, a small town in the same county that was just less than 10 miles away from the alien lady sportwear. 2 weeks after the call, a self-proclaimed psychic telephoned Frederick Police, informing them that their investigation should center around a man she only referred to as Sean. She claimed the Sean character was acting strangely regarding the case, going as far as sending her clippings from newspaper and asking her bizarre and probing questions about Tracy Lynn Kirkpatrick. Apparently, willing to follow up any lead they had, no matter how ridiculous sounding, Frederick Police then descended into Walkersville, where they played the audio recording of the confession to various members of the public in hopes that they might be able to identify the voice on the tape. As it turned out, several people recognized the voice on the tape is neither a Sean nor a Don, saying it belonged to someone whose identity was never made public by investigators. This man never arrested or formally charged with Tracy Lynn Kirkpatrick is murder, and despite thorough searches of his property and his complete lack of alibi, he was subsequently rolled out as a suspect. Essentially, the identity of Tracy Lynn Kirkpatrick killer is a complete mystery. But there is one interesting detail that seems to have been completely overlooked by law enforcement. You see, there was a man named Don present at the sportswear store that night. The same security guard that apparently stumbled across Tracy's body is named Don Barnes Jr., and his father is none other than Don Barnes Sr., who was actually the sheriff of Frederick County at the time of Kirkpatrick murder. Despite him being one of the only people present at the time she was murdered, Don Barnes Jr. has never been considered a suspect. Now, this could easily be because whoever committed the murder was well aware of Don's presence in the area on the night of the murder and sought to implicate him. But even if this was the case, surely Don would have faced some form of casual questioning, given that no one else was present when Tracy Lynn Kirkpatrick's body was found. Apparently, he didn't, and many have alleged that this is because Don Barnes Jr. was actually a prime suspect, whose involvement was completely covered up at the hands of the sheriff father. However, the allegations of nepotism are exactly that, purely allegations. And since no one single person has been charged or implicated in the crime in any serious way, the case remains, and may forever remain unsolved.
I was a bad kid. And now I'm not talking about your regular teenage delinquency, like trying cigarettes, school detention, or getting bad grades. I mean really bad. The age 17, I was shoplifting, stealing cars, getting picked up by cops for all sorts of things. Not exactly hurting anyone, but I was a constant headache for my mom and dad. Then after me and dad almost got into an actual fist fight, he kicked me out of the house. I knew I deserved it, and I knew they figured I'd just go stay with friends for a couple of days, because that's exactly what I did. But me being me, I quickly wore out my welcome in my buddies' houses and ran out of places to stay. But again, me being me, I was way too proud to just go home and apologize. Since it was summertime, I figured it'd be a good idea to head down to the park to find somewhere to sleep. Now, I lived in the inner city back then, so there was a bunch of other actual homeless people already sleeping there. And as soon as I realized I was actually stuck out there for a night, I started to realize that this homeless thing wasn't a game anymore. As it started to get really late, I got to the park at around 11 p.m., and it was like 1 a.m. by the time this happened. One of the homeless dudes walked up to me as I started to bed down on the bench and started talking to me. He asked what I was doing, and being naive, I told him homelessness, immediately responding by saying, "No, you're not," and pretty much guessed the whole deal about me having a falling out with my mom and dad. I didn't want to admit that he was exactly right, so I just kept my mouth shut. But I remember him saying something like, "Really though, kid, if you have Ken, you need to pay him a visit because I promise you ain't ready for this life." My pride kept me out there for 3 whole nights, and every single time I caught up on that bench, the same old homeless dude would walk up and be like, "Go home, the sing you." In hindsight, he was exactly right. But at the time, he was just another person to prove wrong. My final night on the street, I also happened to be the first that I tried to integrate myself with the homeless folk who slept in the park, partially out of boredom and partially out of hunger. I'd run out of money, run out of food, and I figured if I hung out with the other guys, I could maybe get in on some of their food or something. I asked around, but no one had any spares until I asked this one guy, and he told me to buzz off, and I noticed a Snickers bar sticking out of his coat pocket. My rumbling stomach basically just overrode my brain, and with all the dexterity of a Victorian pickpocket, I slid the thing out of his pocket and walked off. Now, my proudest moment stealing food from a homeless guy, when I could have just swallowed my pride and walk home, but it is what it is. So I go off to hide somewhere so I can devour the Snickers hold, and I walk back to where the other guys are to hang out some more. Maybe like 2 or 3 hours later, I'm still trying to integrate myself with the homeless guys, but I'm also still pretty nervous about them for obvious reasons. I figured the guy I stole from is too drunk to even notice that I stole from him. But oh boy, was I wrong about that. Because like I said, a few hours after I stole it, I noticed the guy began to tap his coat pocket, obviously noticing that the candy bar is gone. I'm trying to remain inconspicuous, but I'm also trying to keep my eye on the guy, because if he put 2 and 2 together and worked out that it was me that stole from him, I wanted enough warning to be able to get out of there. So the guy taps his pocket when he stops. I can see the cogs turning in his booze-soaked brain, as I figured he was thinking pretty sure I had some candy in there. But then a few seconds later, he's back taking pulls from his 40 ancillary, had completely forgotten about the whole thing. Only he hadn't. And the most shocking thing about what came next was how he went from 0 to 100 in like a second flat. So remember that pool of his 40. He takes 1, then 2, then a third much larger one, almost like he was trying to polish the whole thing off in a hurry. Which, as it turned out, was exactly what he was doing, because what was once an innocent beverage receptacle soon became a weapon. When he turned to the guy to his right and sent the glass 40 bottles smashing into his face, the guy just collapsed, hands covering his face, some hands with muffled blood, curdling screams that he let out, and the guy I stole from then started kicking the lie. If I let him steal from me, mother effer. And then, of all the homeless people there, only one actually tried to break it up. And even then, it was just a slurred by breaking up over there, which ended up being totally ignored. I I remember turning to the older dude had been nice to me, telling me to go home and whatnot, and I feigned ignorance. As I asked him what was going on, the guy said the dude getting beat down was always stealing stuff, so if anything went missing around the park, it was most probably his fault. No one cared though. No one gave single worry that this guy was getting his face stomped on, and it was all my fault. Oh, and I mean stomped on. I could hear this guy's face literally crunching under this guy's boot. I know I should have said something. I know I should have owned up. But believe me when I tell you that I've never been that scared. Not before or after. All I could think of was, if I tell the truth, that'd be my face getting stomped on. Only he'll probably be like 100 times worse because, well, look what I cost. I turned to the nice guy and was like, what if he didn't steal it? What if someone else stole it? And the guy looked at me and his eyes went all wide and he leaned in and said, don't say a word, kid. Just leave. Leave and never ever come back. As I walked away, I could still hear the guy getting his buck beaten, although I never found out what happened to him. I don't see anyone being able to survive the kind of head injuries he got. A very same night, maybe at around 2 a.m., I walked back to my parents' house and banged on the front door until my dad woke up and answered. I just blurted out this big long apology about being a total idiot to not appreciate what I'd had. I'm pleased to say that now is the first step on the road of being a decent human being, because almost everything I did before that had little to no consequences, or rather, will little there were and bother me. But that night I sold the candy bar, I actually saw how bad the repercussions could be. And honestly, I had no idea that could ever be that bad. Just for taking a candy bar. I feel equal parts shame and horror when I look back on it. My pride and greed caused me to do something shameful, and my cowardice might have cost him a relatively innocent man's life. I wish it had never happened, but at the same time, if it didn't, who knows? I might be still hanging out in that park today, if I'd even been alive at all.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. The Nelsons moved to their new house on February of 2004. They got a good price for the old house and were able to upgrade their living because of that. They moved to a smaller town instead of a city and did some changes in the education formation and were able to up their game in society and were now better respected and much more social than they were in the city. The Nelson family had one Mr. Nelson, the head of the house, one Miss Nelson, the housemaker, and their 2 kids. The kids were quite oddballs, especially the younger one. He seemed to be a bit more out of the blue with things, and when they moved to this new house, they were worse than they were before. The elder brother would still connect to the people on the outside, but the younger one could just not find a way to mingle with kids his age, so he became a loner at a young age. Quite tragically, the moments alone lured him to enjoy things that didn't involve much more people, and there were things that got out of hand way too fast. And soon it went from just playing pretend to finding things to destroy or put small fires in his backyard. It was almost like something sinister was building up inside of him in that new house, and not even his parents knew what was happening, so he kept to his act without any trace of evil visible. He was caught once when he was trying to skin a bird, but he deceived his way out of the thing, and that kicked in the psychopath inside of him, and he was able to mimic people's emotions and manipulate them and use them for his advantage, and the Nelson family moved again. And this time, he wasn't the loner boy. He decided to change up his image a bit, and to everyone's ignorance, it seemed positive to the rest of the world. But he was planning something sinister and scarier than most people could imagine. He was in high school now, and there was so much that he was planning on to do, and nobody had the idea about his sinister plans, and things were not noticed by anyone. He decided to walk in the room, and that is when he planted something all over the place and decided to head out. The parents were out, and his brother was out on the call, so he decided to call in a party at his house, and everybody he knew in school started heading in. He was determined about the party, but mostly he stood outside of it. It was something odd, and then an hour in, the house blasted into flames, a commotion of screams and children running on fire, and the boy sat on the chair looking at everything and everyone as they burn. Then in around 10 minutes, he got up and acted as if he was bothered and called the services. Around 11 children died, and a lot of them were injured. Weeks later, they said that somebody planted the exploding homemade charges everywhere. Nobody was under the radar, but sadistic young brother son of Mr. Nelson knew who was the culprit here.
I met a guy online back in August of last year. We immediately hit it off. I was reluctant to get into a relationship though, as I had been cheated on a few months prior and lied to the entire relationship. Catching feelings for anyone again scared the life out of me. But this guy was so sweet and nice that I trusted him and was willing to risk it for him. Skip to mid-September. We both admitted feelings for each other, and a while before this, but he was reluctant to ask me out. I wasn't sure why, but I figured he was just waiting for the right moment, which he was, because he slipped that his birthday was coming up, and I pointed out how come he's turning 19 and still in high school. Then he said that he isn't 19, he's 17, and he's turning 18 in a few days. This made me mad though. We've never actually been intimate. I'm 18, and I don't like being lied to. We both met in a place that's only for 18 plus people. He pointed out that I never directly asked him his age. I just assumed because of where we met. Despite this, when he turned 18 and asked me out, I said yes. We lasted less than a month. He would start fights every single day over the dumbest stuff. If I took over 10 minutes to reply, he would get mad at me and told me I needed to tell him when I was going to do stuff. So he wasn't waiting for my message. He got mad, and I had been in relationships before him, despite none of them turning out good. So I broke up with him. I thought maybe in the future things would stop, because this is his first relationship and he was just unexperienced. I told him multiple times calmly that things need to change, and once the fight stopped, we can try again. But they never stopped for more than a few days. One time he lied to me, saying some girl had been flirting with him and asking if he was single or taken, just so I confirm a relationship, which I didn't because we weren't dating anymore, and he got mad. I pointed out it was obviously a lie, but he insisted it happened. Only later that evening did he admit that it was a lie. Eventually, I shut off my Snapchat map because I didn't want him knowing where specifically I lived, and he got mad that I didn't trust him. One of my best IRL friends messaged me asking why he was requesting to follow her. I checked his Instagram, and he had started following everyone who was following me. I told him to unfollow them because he doesn't even know any of them, and it's kind of weird. He got mad, but he did unfollow them. 2 weeks ago, I woke up one morning and he told me we need to talk. He asked me why I've been lying to him, why I've been hiding things behind his back. I asked him what he was talking about because I never lied to him nor hid anything from him. He said he has been messaging all of my friends on Instagram asking for information about me, who I've dated, who I've been doing, etc. He asked me why I've been FaceTiming people behind his back, not telling him everything about my past relationships, etc. How to know if I was more shocked to the fact that he did this, or than the fact that those people were actually giving him information about me. I never did anything behind his back though.
And the only person I ever FaceTimed me first randomly and for 30 minutes just to play 8-ball and iMessage. He even mentioned talking to people who I haven't talked to in months. He also made alternate accounts, befriending people from my past, voice chatting with them, playing games with them, all just to get info from them about me once they opened up. He even mentioned that my ex had messaged me, which I never told anyone, so I had no idea how he found that out. My Snapchat kept logging me out, so I think he hacked into my Snapchat to read my conversations with people. He found my old Reddit and went back 2 years of common history to get mad at stuff I've said in the past. When I asked him how he found out about my one ex contacting me, he said, "You don't deserve to know," before proceeding to block me on everything. The day after, he emailed me saying that there's nothing left to say, we're just acquaintances now, etc., etc. I told him now, and we aren't even acquaintances anymore. He's just some crazy dude I dated, and it's his loss in the end, because he caused this by doing detective work, as he liked to put it. He said he did all this, and he was curious, not that he didn't trust me. And he found lots of stuff he didn't want to. I guess about my past relationships, because that's all he ever mentioned. His little tangent went on for quite a while saying he's my loss and he could have made me happy and blah blah. I told him he never could have made me happy. His money, which wasn't much, maybe, but not him. As a person, not since the first fight started. Born on March 23rd at 1987 in Transbog, Sweden, Kim Isabel Wahl dreamed of a career in journalism. Later in life, that dream would be realized when she was accepted to study international relations at the London School of Economics, with her career prospects strengthened after she went on to study journalism and international relations at Columbia University in New York City. Kim returned to Denmark with one of the finest journalistic credentials in the world, setting in the capital of Copenhagen with her boyfriend Ola Stober. It was there that she began to write articles for some of the most popular news outlets in the world, such as The Guardian and The New York Times, Vice, and Time magazine, and went on to win the Hand-Sewn Meat Prize for Best Digital Reportage in March of 2016. She was a woman destined to reach the very top of the journalistic career ladder, but on August 10th of 2017, she received a death message that kicked off a chain of events that would ultimately end in her untimely death. The text was from Danish entrepreneur of James Madison, a man known for the manufacturing of submarines. Kim had requested an interview with Peter earlier that year, and the opening text was Madsen accepting the request. However, there was one special caveat. The interview would have to take place aboard his personal midget submarine, the US-3 Nautilus. Kim agreed to his terms, arranging a 2-hour interview beneath the Baltic Sea that would take place at around 7 p.m. Kim then met with Madsen at the arranged time. They boarded the Nautilus and then set off to conduct the interview. Madsen's staff expected his return at around 9:30 p.m. that evening, yet when the submarine failed to resurface when expected, both Madsen's staff and Kim's loved ones begged the local police to launch a rescue operation. Half a dozen search and rescue teams from a number of different services pulled the resources, and shortly after 10:30 a.m. the following morning, the Nautilus was sighted just southeast of the Drunk-then Lighthouse and Cube Bay. Peter Madsen was rescued and was found to be in fairly good health. Kim Wahl, on the other hand, was nowhere to be found, and Peter was asked where Kim was. He was apparently devastated to inform them that she passed away from injuries resulting from a catastrophic mechanical failure. Danish police promptly arrested him on charges of negligent manslaughter, and during his interview, Madsen admitted that he'd found her death so distressing that he rejected her body from the submarine, and that she was probably still floating in the Baltic Sea. At first, as tragic as it was, Madsen's story seemed to check out. But all that changed when a proper analysis of the submarine was conducted.
The mechanical engineers who sought to identify the reason behind the mechanical failure basically failed to find one. To them, not only could they not understand how someone had died from the existing damage, but it almost looked like someone was deliberately trying to sabotage the submarine from the inside whilst it was in water. When this hypothesis was presented to Madsen, and despite overwhelming incidents to the contrary, he flatly denied having deliberately scuttled his own $200,000 submarine. And so, police were faced with two key questions. Why would a man destroy such an expensive piece of personal property? And where was Kim Wall's body? In the end, the answer to both questions would wash up on the beach southwest of Oma 11 days after she'd first disappeared. On the morning of August 21, 2017, a passing cyclist was horrified to discover a dismembered human torso washed up on the beach. A post-mortem found 15 stab wounds, mostly in the region of the cadavers growing on the team of Swedish divers later recovered to plastic bags nearby, each containing a head, a pair of legs, some clothes, and a blood-stained knife. A short time after that, a saw was found washed up on the same stretch of beach, only adding to the sinister implications. At first, the police didn't actually expect the body to be Kim's, since Madsen had already stated that he dropped her body into the water untouched. But he completely failed to mention that he'd taken the time to dismember her before tossing the pieces into the sea. At a September 5th court hearing, Madsen asserted that Kim had died after being struck on the head by a faulty latch cover, and that the whole thing was simply a horrible accident. If Madsen was unaware that the Danish police had not only seized in a sense his personal computer, but they'd also been in touch with several former girlfriends, some of whom had incriminating testimonies to share with the court. Police stated that while persecuting the files and folders of Madsen's hard drive, they found a number of disturbingly graphic snuff films, some of which include death by decapitation. His former lawyers then testified the maximum is extremely violent in the bedroom, and they had personally witnessed him gaining gratification from watching excruciating videos. But without a doubt, the worst piece of evidence presented was the fact that Kim was underwater. The same she had been wearing the night she died was found secretly among Madsen's possessions. Madsen had absolutely no explanation for why this was the case, and the case became destined to go to trial. And despite Madsen's claim that Kim had died as a result of massive brain trauma, the post-mortem performed on her severed head found no evidence of damage from a blunt object. Madsen then changed his story, admitting to having dismembered her, but only after she died as a result of a horrible accident. He went on to claim that she could have been poisoned by a poisonous gas leak, but again, the post-mortem found no traces of exhaust gases in her lungs. In early 2018, Madsen was officially charged with several offenses, including murder, decent handling of a corpse, and assault. It was also implied that Madsen had extensively tortured Kim before delivering the final blow, and there was a great deal of evidence to support this claim. So much so that on April 25th, Peter Madsen was convicted of all 3 charges and sentenced to life imprisonment. Peter maintained his innocence until September of 2020, when the documentary was released in which he fully admitted to having murdered Ken Wall. But less than a month later, Madsen briefly escaped from prison by threatening a prison psychologist with a fake pistol and bomb belt. However, the objects were determined to be a mere ruse. Madsen was surrounded and rearrested just 500 meters from the prison walls. Friends and colleagues over the world were stunned to hear of Kim's horrific murder, and as the extent of Madsen's evil came to light, the world was disgusted by both his deviancy and his attempts to escape justice. Following her death, Kim's friends and family started the Kim Guam Memorial Fund, a foundation designated to fund female reporters who cover stories of cultural value. And in October of 2017, Kim was posthumously nominated for Prix Europa's Outstanding Achievement Award. The journalist community felt it was the least they could do to honor a woman willing to take risks to get the truth, ensuring that long after her murder was forgotten, Kim would be fondly remembered by those who wish to follow in her footsteps. Good Morning America was a popular show on the American national television and was hosted by really famous people. This show was actually the replacement of the show called Good Day America, a show that only taped one episode because it was abrupted by an incident never before filmed on live camera. Very handful of people were actually able to catch a glimpse of the show that aired years ago now. It all started at early 8 in the morning when one of the reporters from the Good Day America got a lead on a refreshing story that was called in to report it. It was Claire Savant, who was sent to report the story. It was Claire's first day at the job, and she was excited to be able to cover a fresh lead on the first day of her job, and it boosted her confidence. Claire left for reporting the story at 8, and she received the address of the place via text. She was bold, and she was very much in command of the story, but she didn't know what to expect. But since it was a morning show, she wasn't really worried about it. Claire arrived at the place mentioned in the text. It was a cafe at the corner of the 7th Street, but she has no idea who called her. She was just told to hold the rose and sit at the table, so she did that. She was there for about an hour and was getting impatient, and decided to leave since the leads seemed to be bogus. As she got up, the person sitting behind her was shot. She was shocked, but she alerted the cameraman and they started reporting. "I am the Doorman Cafe in 7th Street, and a man has just been shot right here. And I was sitting right in front of that table, and as soon as I got up, the bullet probably pierced through the window and hit the man sitting right behind at that table." She reported for a while, and then stopped when the police arrived. They investigated her and let her go. She received another text. It was the same person, and the text said, "At Cafe Rosie on Broadway and 5th. She and her team quickly started their Jeep and arrived as soon as possible. And then it was the same there. There was a rose waiting for her at the table, and she was sitting. She got another text that said, 'Tell your friend to point the camera at right.' She informed the cameraman about the text, and soon as he shifted the focus of the camera to the right, bang, loud noise, and a bullet coming right through the window, piercing it and hitting the woman sitting in the right. And she started her reporting as the camera was rolling. She was in shock after realizing that she is connected to these things, but she never disclosed it. She received another text, and it said, 'Seems like you're enjoying all the leads. I will give you one.' As she was waiting for the lead, the show was stopped. It was put on halt, and the show just saw a live murder, and it was not good for the rating points for a morning show, so the show was taped, but was never aired. Claire messaged the person back. The show was canceled. She received a text an hour later, at Café DuPont. She ditched the team and went to the Café DuPont, waiting for this mystery murder. Claire became a celebrity reporter on the very first day of her work. Everyone was recognizing her and tried to console her. But she was more than a reporter in crisis. She was the crisis itself. As I entered the cafe, I hugged her. There was a distant smell of gunpowder on me, but Claire already brought me a new shirt. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. "6 years ago, I flew over the Atlantic to South Africa for my first ever safari. I always had a fascination with Africa and the wildlife of the Serengeti.
One that actually stems from being obsessed with The Lion King when I was a kid. I had that Elton John soundtrack on cassette tape too, and I used to annoy my mom by belting out The Circle of Life every time we drove anywhere. But over time, that love for Simba and Friends evolved and matured, and soon, I was reading books on Maasai culture. It got to the point where I was fixated on the idea of traveling to Africa, and while my sorority sisters talked about visiting the beaches of Bali or the Bahamas after they graduated, my heart was set on the Serengeti. It took me years to be able to afford the flights, accommodation, and in-country transportation, but eventually, I had a good enough job and a pattern of bank account to be able to afford my dream trip to South Africa. And it was every bit as amazing as I imagined. I spent a whole week on various Jeep safaris, hanging out by a 4x4 with a pair of binoculars. And let me tell you, even at a distance, just knowing you're looking at an actual lion is a serious adrenaline rush. On one of the safaris, a nice Canadian guy mentioned how incredible an experience it was, but lamented that he couldn't just get a little closer to some of the wildlife. Our guide reminded us that even at 200 meters away, some of the wildlife we were admiring could close the distance in just a matter of seconds. It was every bit as humbling as I expected, like I've never felt quite so vulnerable in all my life, even in the relative safe confines of the various Jeeps I traveled in. But that feeling was nothing compared to what I felt when I decided to take a very different kind of safari. I first started properly considering an air safari after I landed in Johannesburg and began to see various commercials for them, and never really been interested until I spoke to someone on one of my Jeep safaris that talked about air tours like they were God's gift to naturalize. According to her, air safaris were by far the best way to see the wildlife, and she'd go on an air safari every time if she could only afford it. Apparently, the animals don't react in quite the same way to the buzzing of an overhead aircraft as they do to a loud, clearly visible Jeep. And she mentioned that the best way to get unfettered views of the animals acting completely natural there was with an air safari. That settled it for me. It didn't matter if I had taken a chunk out of my budget. I needed to get on that air safari to experience the same rush that she had. I ended up exchanging emails with a representative from one particular air safari company who promised me an extensive tour at a very reasonable price. A few $1,000s later, I was meeting up with a bush pilot on this little airstrip in the middle of nowhere and staring at the single-engine propeller plane that we'd be flying around the Serengeti. The battered old thing looked like it'd be like 20 or 30 years old, but the pilot assured me that she was the most reliable aircraft in their inventory and that she'd never failed him yet. I was a little apprehensive, but since he seemed so confident in the plane's ability, I saw no reason to disbelieve him. If he didn't think it was safe, surely he'd be the first person to refuse to fly it, right? So with that in mind, I climbed in the passenger side of the prop plane, and off we went in the skies above the Serengeti. At first, it was everything I'd hoped for and more. The plane flew low and slow enough for us to get some, frankly, incredible views of the animals. And I was amazed that they didn't react more than they did to some big metal bird in the sky buzzing over their heads. Only the younger animals near each herd seemed to pay any attention to us. All the while, moms continue to graze like, chill. We see these things all the time. Sometimes, we'd fly up just a little higher, then lean into a gentle turn that allowed us to circle any herd that I took an interest in, giving me a full-on bird's-eye view. I'll admit it was a little less personal than the Jeep safaris. He didn't quite get the same adrenaline hit.
But little did I know, I was about to get a lifetime's worth of adrenaline. In just a few short minutes, about 20 minutes into the flight, we were circling over this herd of elephants with a steady droning of the plane's engine buzzing in our ears. Then suddenly, the buzzing stopped. It didn't just stop dead either. There was a stuttering start-stop rattling sound as the engine tried to keep itself going. But then, it just gave out altogether. I looked at the pilot completely baffled, but he waved away my concerns. Well, thumbing the plane's ignition, making out like it happens all the time and nothing was to worry about. I've stalled my car in traffic before, slightly embarrassing, but nothing to worry about. So I figured what we were going through was the aviation equivalent of just that. You rotating at best, scary at worst, but still, nothing to worry about, as I'm waiting for the engine to work back into life, and the pilot's repeated attempts to restart it. It dawns on me that this isn't some run-of-the-mill mechanical problem. The engine had died, and it wasn't coming back to life. And that horrifying fact became obvious once the pilot started trying to restart the engine. How I managed to avoid a complete mental breakdown, I don't know. But as the pilot turned to me and said, "We're going to have to land," I just heard, "We're going to crash." I remember wanting to ask him if we were going to die, but the words just wouldn't come out. I just stayed quiet as the pilot talked me through what we were about to do. "We're not going to crash, don't worry, but this is going to be a bumpy landing." Okay, again, I couldn't say it, but at the time, I was convinced it was the end. And when I realized that this weird feeling of calm came over me, this bizarre acceptance, and all of a sudden, I found I was completely calm. It was like there was no point worrying about something that I was doomed to face. We were going down, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it other than brace for impact. The only thought I had left by the time we began to drop altitude was hoping that it would be quick and that we wouldn't burn to death before the vultures devoured whatever charred mess was left. At 200 feet, I was concentrating on my breathing, trying to keep calm as the trees and foliage below got bigger and bigger. At 100 feet, I began shaking, unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. I mean, think less nervous shaking and more terrified vibration. I turned to ask the pilot something, and I remembered him barking back, "Shut up and let me think." It was the kind of comment that would have me clapping back in any normal situation. But in a dead engine prop plane over the African bush, I decided to just take it on the chin. At 50 feet, the pilot suddenly shouted, "Hold on." The nose tilted down slightly, and he began to bring us in for the emergency landing. I remembered just gripping onto this little handle in the cockpit, but I couldn't watch. So I decided to just shut my eyes and hope for the best. Then whammo, we hit the dirt hard. But instead of rolling over a crash, I could feel the landing gear of the plane rumbling against the earth. The plane was shaking like a leaf, and I was convinced it was about to just fall apart at any moment, but somehow it didn't. I heard the pilot shouting, "Come on, girl, come on, you can do it." As he talked to the plane then, out of nowhere, he just started whooping and hollering and celebrating. It didn't feel like we were safe, but the pilot knew that the worst was over and that we weren't going to just explode in a ball of flame. When we finally came to a complete stop, the pilot started laughing maniacally, kissing the dash of the plane and telling me, "I told you that she hadn't let me down yet." I was in just complete total shock thinking, oh my Jesus Christ, I just survived a plane crash. I just survived the freaking plane crash. And that's when the euphoria hit. I'm still shaking, but I'm turning to the pilot, high-fiving him, telling him he's the man. It was the most intense feeling of my entire life, and one I'll never, ever forget. We were pretty banged up, but we were otherwise okay. It was nothing short of a miracle. But we weren't quite out of trouble yet. Once the euphoria died down, we realized we were stranded in the middle of the Serengeti. And our crash had attracted an awful lot of attention. No, most animals would have run a mile to get away from the big metal bird that came crashing down to Earth. But not all of them. Some were attracted to the chaos and the destruction, and it led to my closest encounter with any animal in all of Africa. We were quite easily able to relay our rough coordinates to the rescue team, and the pilot had a few flares that he could light and throw out on the ground if it got dark. So it's not like we were going to be stuck there for a frighteningly long length of time. But even the 90 minutes or so that we had to wait seemed like an eternity, because we were exposed to all of the wildlife the Serengeti had to throw at us. We got kind of lucky in the end, I think. But we still had a rather close encounter that frankly scared the life out of me. When you think of the scariest animals in Africa, you tend to think of lions, maybe hippos, definitely snakes and spiders. I doubt many people's first answer would be hyenas. But you can bet your butt that's my answer, after a pack of them wandered within just 50 feet to get a look at us. People say they laugh, right? Or the heel kick sound that they make is kind of like a person laughing. Let me tell you, once you hear that sound with your ears, it sounds nothing like laughter. It's terrifying. I remember jumping back into the cockpit of the crashed plane, like there are hyenas over there. The pilot was taking a freaking nap, but woke up to show me the pistol we kept in the same place as the flares. Let me know if they get close and I'll frighten them. Okay, try and relax. Try and relax. He tells me to try to relax with a gang of bang hyenas just a few feet away. If ever there was a clear sign that that bush pilot was completely insane, it was that. But I still owed him my life, so you can bet I didn't say squat to him. Not long after I heard the distinct sound of an engine and the distance and the plane's radio buzzed into life. It was the rescue team, having driven as fast as they could for almost 100 miles to reach us. Never been so happy to see another human being in my whole life. They drove us back to civilization and ate the single best meal of my life with a pilot at this little roadside diner. He asked for 2 orders of bunny chow, which turned out to be an entire loaf of bread stuffed with curry. And as it turned out, a bunny chow and several beers are exactly what a person needs after surviving a small-scale plane crash in the middle of Africa. When I was around 15, I lived alone in a 2-story house. Although there were bedrooms upstairs, I would sleep on the living room couch. This was for 2 reasons. One, it was the central location of the house, so I could hear everything too. It was equidistant from every exit. One night, at around 2 in the morning, I heard someone juggling the front doorknob. It was slow, cautious jiggle, like they were trying not to be heard. When the door didn't open, they didn't stop. The jiggling slowly became less cautious and more irritated. They persisted for at least 2 minutes. We went to the back door, which was also locked. If I didn't want to call the police, because I was an unemancipated minor living alone. I didn't want to be placed into foster care, and I didn't want my parents in trouble for neglect. Eventually, the jiggling stopped. I stayed up that night waiting for them to try other entrances, but nothing happened.
A few nights passed, and I awoke to the sound of the door opening upstairs. The doors in the house would really stick, so they took a lot of force to open. When he popped them loose, they'd make a loud scrape pop and shutter noise. At the time, I would take sleeping pills. It made it really hard to fully awaken, and I'd sometimes only awaken with sleep paralysis. I couldn't determine whether I dreamt the sound or whether I woken up from it. I started to fall back asleep and thought I heard the door close like grinding of wood rubbing together. Then the sound of bed springs screeching like weights were being shifted. I thought, maybe someone is homeless and they thought this was an abandoned house. I was super tired and wasn't sure if I was actually conscious. I fell back asleep and awoke to the feeling of somebody watching me. There were stairs parallel to the living room door, and I could see them from the couch. Halfway down the stairwell, I could see a long-haired man, crouched over, looking at me. It was dark, and I felt like we were both trying to verify what we were seeing. I kept a metal baseball bat by the couch and grabbed it. Slowly, the man erected his body and without turning backed up the stairs. I just listened for him to leave or waited for him to come back down. But I heard neither. It was like he just stood at the top of the stairs waiting for me. I didn't go back to sleep. I heard nothing, even until sunrise. When I left for school that morning, that questioned what I'd actually experienced. I had my boyfriend over later that evening. As we approached the house, he said, "Hey, your windows are open." I looked in the room to the sticking door was wide open. I told him what I'd experienced the night before, and he helped me check out the house. After finding nothing, I enclosed and locked the windows. I figured it must have been a hobo. Once they realized somebody lived there, they left. I still stayed there that night, but I didn't take sleeping pills. I woke to the door opening again. This time, I knew it was real. They knew somebody lived there, but they still returned. At this time of my life, I had little value for my life. I had no fear of death because I knew where I'd go. I decided that I wasn't going to hide in my own house. I got my baseball bat, turned on the lights, and went upstairs. I yelled something like, "Listen, buddy, I'm coming up. Be out by the time I get there." I heard nothing and prepared for the worst. I checked the rooms and the closets, but I found nothing, and the windows were still open. I checked the downstairs and found nothing as well. I felt pretty silly after finding nothing, but still stayed out that night. I got ready for school the next morning and saw that the window was open again. It occurred to me that I hadn't checked under the beds when I'd done the search. I didn't have my bat with me and bailed. To think that intruder was possibly hiding under the bed as I searched the house is spooky, but I'm partially relieved that I hadn't checked. If I'd been down and come face to face with the man beneath my bed, the story may have ended differently. This story happened around 4 years ago. Back when I was 18 and had just graduated high school, I decided to volunteer for a month in Southern Asia country before my university starts. Since volunteering was something I always wanted to do, I managed to find a place to volunteer at and was supposed to live for the first week with family friends. Then I started living at my workplace. Thing is, my workplace couldn't house me due to construction and having another female volunteer coming soon, so I had to find a hotel to stay at, and that was probably my biggest mistake. I went on the internet and started looking for a hostel. Sure enough, I found one in the center of the city in a relatively safe area.
Also, the hostel had many great reviews from foreigners, so I thought it was safe. I visited the hostel and was greeted by Jin. He was the nephew of the owner and was responsible for greeting foreigners and showing them around. Jin was in his mid-20s, an average-looking dude, probably around 5'8". I'm 6'3", which will be important later after I make the arrangements for my stay there and agree to come the next day, and invites me to go with him on a walk to show me around the neighborhood, which I agree to. During our walk, he tells me about himself. He lived in the UK for a bit, tells me about his family, and asks me if I smoke. Back when I was a cool kid fresh out of high school, so I aesthetically told him yes, since I was actually trying to get some blood but didn't know how. He told me he can get it, and when I come tomorrow, we'll have some for me. The next day I go to the hospital and he tells me that he couldn't get it, so I have to go with him to his friend's George's to get it. And in hindsight, that was a big red flag, but I was a dumb kid who really wanted to smoke, so of course I said yes. George almost looked like a cartoon villain. All his facial features were sharp and narrow and had the little Van Dyke beard to go with it. We all get into the tuk-tuk and drove to the slums of the city to meet the dealer. I think the area was called when not the Moolah, not sure. Anyways, we get the bud and they tell me where you're making a stop at George's house and smoking there for a bit fine with me. I had no reason to suspect them, since they were nice and polite to me. We reached his house, still within the slum area. It was a small room with a bed and 3 chairs, nothing else. No tables or decor or anything. I sat on the chair, Jen sat on my right, and George sat on the bed rolling out some joints for us. We started smoking and talking. They started asking me about why I'm here, how old I am, and stuff like that. Suddenly, it started becoming a little too personal, asking me what my parents do for a living, how much they make, and the one that really caught my attention: who are the people you live with? The family friends? And do they know where you are and they're going to worry about you if you don't call them soon, or something to that effect? I was stoned by then, but the moment they said that, I started sobering up quick and realizing that I'm in a messed up situation. I told them that I'm supposed to call in a few hours and that they know which hostel I'm staying at. Suddenly, another guy came and just stood at the doorway, completely blocking it. He was about my height, but much bigger in size than me. I was trapped between them and essentially had nowhere to go. Luckily, they couldn't do anything to me yet, since I told them I'm supposed to make a phone call to my family friends. Starting to get very nervous and anxious, I tell them I'm too baked and can't even move or smoke, so kept passing up on my turn to smoke. I just lay there, acting as if though I'm tired in my mind. They started speaking in their native language, and it was clear to me that they were actually talking about me. Jin told them about my electronics I had, and that I had paid my full stay in cash. Now George, God bless his soul, thought I wasn't aware of my surroundings, so in perfect English, Jin told me he doesn't speak English. He started mocking me, kept saying nice phone, and asked me if I know how to swim. I just looked at him and smiled and told them it's time to go, because I was starting to get tired. We walked out and I told them I needed to go to the market real fast and if they needed anything, and they kept telling me that they'll get me whatever I want themselves. But I insisted that I wanted to go and that they should send one of them with me, and they sent the big guy. Now the market was across the street from a bus station, and that bus doesn't stop at the station. They just slowed down and you hop in and hop out. So now was my chance. I waited until I saw the bus approaching, sprinted like my life depended on it. And it did, and I hopped in. They were screaming at me to come back and started running after the bus, and at one point, I even heard one of them scream that you're lucky. The moment the bus reached the neighborhood of the family friends, I hopped out and walked around the neighborhood in the morning. I went to work and told them that a tuk-tuk had tried to kidnap me. So they escorted me to the hostel where I took my belongings and work allowed me to stay with them. Thank God. When I told my family friends about what happened, they told me it's a common scam here and that they were planning to steal my belongings and dump me in the river when they left the house. And that's where they asked if I knew how to swim and if someone was expecting me. Born in Portuguese Angola on October 5th of 1945, a young Carlos Antonio Castro had a passion for poetry, and his love of written word evolved into a playful but intense interest in journalism. At just 15 years old, Carlos moved to the Angolan capital of Luanda to begin his career as a reporter, and his star gradually rose until he became one of the most high-profile TV personalities in the entire Portuguese-speaking world. Carlos worked in the media for 35 years, mostly covering lighthearted gossip and celebrity stories. In an early 2011, Carlos's rich and storied life would come to a dark and violent and shocking the wider journalist community and breaking the hearts of tens of thousands of adoring fans. During his life, Carlos Castro broke many a big story on musicians, actors, and other celebrities. Perhaps his biggest story was his own. Back in 1990, Carlos was one of the first Portuguese-speaking celebrities to openly come out as gay, and was perhaps one of the first in the world to do so on live television. He later said that being free to quote revealed the feminine side of his personality was something that brought him a lot of joy. But given how overly masculine Latin culture can be, he also found it extremely difficult to. Thankfully, gay and lesbian acceptance rose phenomenally throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, and by 2011, the 65-year-old was quite publicly in a relationship with a 21-year-old male model, Renato Samora, who had been a contestant on the Portuguese modeling-themed reality show In Search of the Dream. But all was not well with the fledgling relationship, as we're about to discover. Just after Christmas of 2010, Carlos and Renato decided to fly to New York City to see some Broadway shows and spend New Year's Eve in Times Square. To some outsiders, the couple seemed very much in love, but close friends and newspaper editor Luis Perez would later state that there had been some friction between the two men towards the end of the trip, but nothing to suggest that anything horrible was about to happen. On Friday, January 7th, Carlos and Renato had planned to catch a musical during the early evening before meeting up with Peter as his ex-wife and daughter at the Intercontinental Hotel. The woman waited quite a while on the hotel's lobby, long after the couple were due to show, but instead of both men arriving, only Renato appeared in the lobby. According to the man, Renato approached them with a dazed look on his face, and when asked where Carlos was, he replied, "Carlos will never leave the hotel again." It was a chillingly cryptic thing to say, and as Renato apparently disappeared from view, the two women rushed to inform hotel security. Just after 7 p.m. that night, hotel security entered this hotel room and found nothing short of a horror show. Carlos had been beaten to death, and in the period, someone had used a laptop computer and a wine bottle as the murder weapons. But perhaps even more horrifying was the fact that someone had castrated him using the corkscrew of a bottle opener. The same corkscrew had also been used to gouge out one of Castro's eyes, but a medical examiner declared that his death was caused by blunt impact injuries to the head and neck compressions. And then, it wasn't possible to determine if he was mutilated before or after he died from his head injuries. Obviously, the NYPD was very focused on talking to the Renato Samora, but when they tracked him down, they discovered he was at the St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital Center after trying to slit his own wrist. After being taken into custody, he was given a psychiatric evaluation at Boulevard Hospital Center. But given that he was considered a person of interest, this was all done under the careful watch of law enforcement. Then, he was declared mentally sound enough to be questioned. Renato stunned the officers in attendance by actually confessing to Carlos's murder. He also tried to take his own life out of grief. He tried to offer himself to avoid having to pay for what he'd done. It would be easy to assume what had happened between Carlos and Renato was a lover's tiff, a passionate disagreement gone horribly wrong. But when asked why he'd killed his lover, Renato told the police that he'd murdered Carlos in a bid to, quote, get rid of his own homosexual demons. During the remainder of the police interview, Renato appeared to be acting extremely erratically, almost as if he was working up to make an insanity defense. After securing both men's cell phones, it became apparent that the couple had been arguing over Carlos, his seeming unwillingness to splash the cash on his much younger boyfriend. In light of that new evidence, police charged Renato with second-degree murder, and given that he'd already confessed, there was no trial, and said the case was handed over to the New York County District Attorney, who recommended that Renato receive the maximum sentence of 25 years to life. January of 2013, Renato Cia Brown was no longer Renato Zamora. He was simply Prisoner 13 at 0056 at the Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York. In accordance with his last will and testament, Carlos Castro's sister would later spread his ashes in the subway tunnel that run under Broadway. It seems particularly haunting that despite the fact that Carlos was tripped in New York was a dream come true for him, it was one that neither he nor Renato would ever return home from.
This happened about 5 years ago when I was around 16 or 17 years old. I always enjoyed walking, and I would spend at least an hour a day walking the roads around where I lived. And one day, when I was out doing my normal route and walking down the street that my house was on, I took a ride out onto the main street, following it until I got to the end. There I would cross the crosswalk and retrace my steps to go home. However, on this particular day, I was about 20 feet from where I would leave the main road on my journey back home. I had my headphones in and was blasting music as always. It can be a bad habit as I'm a young female that has been in some sketchy situations whilst out on my walks. But since it was daylight and the roads were pretty busy, I figured I was safe. But man, was I ever off with that assumption. As I was about to pass the entrance of a side street before leaving the main road, a black Ford F-150 pulled up and a man stopped and gestured for me to walk in front of him. So I did. I turned on my music, taking out my headphones, as I looked to see the man in black Ford was still stopped at the entrance of the side road. I looked at him, puzzled, trying to figure out if he was talking to me. So I pointed out myself, and he grinned, nodding. "What a beautiful girl like you are doing here?" he asked. I laughed awkwardly, walking. I replied, seeing as the answer should have been obvious, "It's a beautiful day for that," he commented, just seeming to make small talk. "Yeah," I stated before going to turn around and continue my route home. "Wait," the man called. I stopped and turned around, just trying to be polite, and even though the encounter was odd, I didn't see too many red flags yet. The man then went off saying things such as, "You're so beautiful, you know you have a really nice body, this hot weather is nice for a hot girl." I grew incredibly uncomfortable at this point, seeing as this man had to be in his mid-40s. He had a bit of receding hairline with black hair and a nose with protruding bridge, blue eyes that was surrounded by slight wrinkles, and was dressed in a dress shirt. So I instantly brought my aid, saying, "I'm a minor." There have been multiple times I've been mistaken for being older than I was, and I was hoping saying this would get this fully grown adult-ass man to back off, but he didn't. "Oh, that's okay. Come on, sweetheart, get in the truck." And that's when I started panicking. Stranger danger. I laughed nervously, looking at the cars around me to see if anyone was noticing what was happening, but nobody did. "No, that's fine, my house isn't far," I said. "No, really, get in the truck. I'll bring you home," he insisted. "No," I repeated. "Come on, just get in here with me," he called as I turned and started walking away. And I was hoping he'd just drive off somewhere else, but he didn't. Instead, he drove extremely slowly and followed me, complimenting me and trying to pressure me into his truck. I thought fast for multiple options for different scenarios, but I chose one simple one. I pulled out my phone while still walking and lifted it up to my ear, pretending too loudly to answer a call. "Hey, Dad, Yeah, no, I'm just on the Mill Street. I'll be home about in 10 minutes. I started pretending to listen to a reply. Okay, you're outside waiting for me? Awesome. Yeah, we can do that when I get back. Love you. After you heard me say that, he took off tires screeching, and I ran back home. I made it within about 6 minutes, actually calling my dad on the way, and he made a call to the police who showed up shortly after and took my statement and the description of that man. It turned out that there was a man on the loose in my area who was exposing himself to minors and trying to pick them up for sexual acts. But they never actually found out exactly who it was. So creepy man in black Ford F-150. Let's not read again.
This happened about a year ago. There were so many terrible factors working against me that night. I'm astounded I got away unscathed, at least physically. This all begins when I'm in my friend's apartment who lives in a really rough part of town, in a series of poor decisions. That night, I decided to get belligerently drunk and take a few pills of God knows what. I know. Safe to say, after a solid night of partying around 4 a.m., I was not in the right state of mind. My drug-addled brain decided that instead of staying at either my friend's apartment like I normally would, I wanted to Uber back to my own apartment. My friend's apartment had 2 separate entrances and exits the building, one in the back unlit parking lot of the building and one facing the street. They had 2 sets of keys for each door, and I only had keys to the one in the back of the apartment. Since my Uber would obviously arrive at the streets and the door in the front of the building locks itself behind you, I exited this way when the driver was soon to arrive. Looking back, standing outside that apartment, I realized I looked like the easiest target on the planet. I'm a small petite female in my early 20s, and I can hardly stay upright. I'm using a street lamp to prop myself up, and not doing a good job at either. The light was basically a beacon for any nearby predator saying, "Come get me." I'm not paying attention to my surroundings at all in this state, despite the fact that there are literally a bullet hole in the front door I just came out of. Not good. I remembered checking to see what Kara was getting picked up and was only able to pick out the fact that it was a black sedan. Soon, after stepping outside, a black sedan pulls up to the curb and starts rolling down the windows. So I stepped forward. Before this man even spoke, I could feel something was wrong. He had an expression like he was tearing me apart with just his eyes. After seeing that look, it gave me a new meaning to the word predator to describe a criminal, because I then knew what it felt like to be prey. He basically barks at me, "I'm your Uber driver." And this was the second red flag that somehow made its way through my brain. Normally, Uber drivers just roll down the window and say your name or any version of that, but always include your name. I think I just stared at him for a second, my brain slowly piecing together the situation I was potentially in, and I asked him, "What's my name?" He immediately is enraged and starts screaming about how he doesn't have a frickin' time for this and just get in the effing car, etc., etc. I don't think I've ever been sobered up so fast in my life. I'm completely panicking. Obviously, this wasn't my Uber. Quickly checking the license plate, I immediately see it's not a match. Meanwhile, this guy is still screaming at me, and I have absolutely no idea what to do. If I bolt in either direction, this guy could easily outrun me or even have a weapon. I'm also pretty sure at this point that if he's trying to nab a random girl off the street, he must have a weapon of some sort. I can't run back into the apartment door right behind me since it locks behind you, and I don't have the key, nor the time to unlock it. Running towards the back door would do nothing as well, and as he's idling right by the mouth of the driveway towards the back parking lot, and again, I would have to take time to find the right keys and get in. If I screamed, I'm not exactly in the type of neighborhood where someone would try to be a vigilante,
and I can still hear the music radiating from my friend's third-floor apartment. I knew they wouldn't hear me. It's also 4 a.m., and absolutely no one is around. People talk a lot on the sub how they either sprint into action or freeze, but I felt incapable of doing either. It was the absolute worst feeling I've ever felt in my life. Everything in me wanted to run, but I felt that if I did, it would be the end of me. But if I kept standing there, staring in shock at the screaming man, the result will be the same. From when he started screaming at me to this point, I'm guessing only 20 seconds had passed. Just as he's looking like he's getting ready to get out of the car, another black sedan pulls up right behind him, checking the license plate as quickly as I can. I realize it's my actual Uber, and I make a full sprint of the car. Really only like 6 steps, and throw myself in screaming at my real Uber driver, "What's my name?" The poor dude looks terrified, but responds with my name quickly, to which I reply, "Get me out of here. That man's trying to kidnap me." If I was in his Uber driver's position, I think I would be too shocked to react as quickly as he did. But my dude flew out of there, offered to call the cops for me, which I declined and now regret, and then walked me to the front door of my apartment, ensuring I got in safely. Truly an incredible human being. You can rest easy knowing he got the fastest tip my college student bank account would allow for, although he deserved much, much more. About 3 years ago, me and a few buddies all found ourselves with some time off on the same day. We all work fairly erratic hours, so on a whim, we decided to bomb it down to the Keys with 2 of our kayaks. We'd heard that there was some serious bonefish just outside of Hillsborough Inlet out near Pompano Beach. And for those who don't know, those bad boys can be absolute units. The world record is like 16 pounds. And trust me, that's a lot of fish considering you're only a stone's throw away from the sand. So anyway, we get up before first light, load up the truck, then head off towards Pompano. Then I don't know if there was some kind of accident ahead of us or if we were just unlucky, but the traffic on the way down to the beach was terrible. So right as we're coming up to an exit, we just say screw it and decide to head over to the Bonefish Flat so we can make the most of our time off. It was the right call, because by the time we rolled up to the flats, the sun had only just started to peak above the horizon. I don't say this about a lot of stuff, but it was actually breathtaking and has been wild since I've been fishing that early. And as much as getting up early sucks hard, it's always worth it when the weather clears in South Florida. We're greeted with this falling tide dump off the flat, but it was still nice and high, so we'd have at least a few hours of fishing ahead of us. So I climb into one of the kayaks and start paddling out, just kind of enjoying the ebb and flow of the tide for a while. You gotta remember, it's still like 6 a.m., and I barely had time to grab coffee or breakfast before we headed out. So I swear it could have just dozed back off there. And then it was super relaxing. Right up until I started getting this real prickly feeling. I've been out on the water for maybe 15 to 20 minutes at that point, just chilling. And like I said, the whole time I've been as relaxed as could be. Then you know that feeling of uneasiness, get that one feels like you're being watched? I get that really bad. No one. I pat myself around doing one ad. All I see is my buddy on the beach getting each of our rods ready. The oldest from last time, so don't hate on me. It's only then that I catch a glimpse of something moving in the water below me. And then I get a good look. I see it's way, way bigger than a bonefish. It was like 10 feet long, the size of a freaking fridge, and it just silently gliding underneath my kayak in about 8 feet of water. It was a bull shark, easily the biggest I've ever seen. and definitely the closest I've ever been to one. I start paddling back to shore as fast as I could, like it was almost an involuntary motion. My brain didn't even give me time to figure out if I was really in danger or not. It just went, "Shark, time to leave," and my body did the rest. By that time, my buddy is out on the water too, and he does the same thing as me, looks up like, "What's going on?" and looks down into the water. Only he lets out, "Oh my God," before he starts paddling like he's got an engine attached to his kayak. And we'd seen sharks before, but usually way further out from the safety of a boat. Seeing one that up close was like a shock to the system that I can only barely describe. I've never felt that kind of base primal fear before, and something I never want to feel again. Since early July of 2017, there have been reports from almost 200 travelers describing unexplained injuries, illnesses, and deaths after drinking alcohol in Mexican tourist resorts. Hundreds of vacationers have returned with tales of blacking out after drinking even the smallest amounts of booze, before waking up to find that they have been robbed, assaulted, hospitalized, or even taken to jail. But when the victims tried to report the incidents, they encountered unhelpful or downright hostile resort workers, hospital staffers, and police officers. Even the US State Department seemed slow or unwilling to help, but at least they were quick to explain that it was because they were unable to investigate or prosecute crimes on foreign soil. Shockingly, when these tourists attempted to warn others of their experience using the website TripAdvisor, the company responded by deleting dozens of posts, citing trolling as the reason for doing so. But what exactly was the cause of these mysterious blackouts and might be responsible for them? And why did the victims come up against such resistance when they attempted to report them? In February of 2018, Wisconsin couple Richard and Mary and Peterson decided to retreat themselves, escaping the frigid north for a week-long cruise in the Gulf of Mexico. At some point, the crew stopped for a day at Nachi Cocoon Beach Club, a private resort in Cozumel, where the Petersons enjoyed a pair of margaritas from the bar. The drinks were whisked over the luxury beach canopy and the 60-year-old couple were occupied. But no less than 30 minutes after their initial toast, the couple began to feel violently ill. It wasn't long before Richard and Marion were stumbling down the beach and emptying their stomachs into the water. Resort staff offered to call a paramedic, but the couple declined, fearing that they would miss their cruise ship's departure. But when they managed to make it back on board, they blacked out for about 2 hours, awakened to find that they had almost no memory of the day's events. It was at that point it dawned on the couple that they might well have been drugged, or at least given tainted alcohol. Even earlier, on May of 2017, the Drinkwine family of Castle Pines, Colorado took their 3 children south of the border for a summer vacation, and there was an added bonus for 19-year-old Bobby Drinkwine. Given that the legal drinking age in Mexico is 18, his parents had given their permission for Bobby to have the odd beer with his dinner. Then one night after some entertainment at the Adicep Teresa del Mar resort, Bellamy decided to hang around the bar after his parents went to bed. Jennifer Drinkwine, Bobby's mother, returned to the bar after getting a bad feeling in her gut, only to find her son to be dangerously intoxicated, stumbling around and completely incoherent. Bar staff told Jennifer that Bobby had only had 1 drink that evening, a shot of tequila, and an amount of alcohol that would have little to no effect on the 6-foot-tall, 200-pound teenager. Bobby's mother called for a golf cart to transport him back to his room. Given that he could barely walk and resort staff had to hold on to Bobby tightly to keep him from falling off the cart, we both were just scared to death. She said we thought we were going to lose him. But by that point, and Bobby had turned pale and his eyes were rolling into their socket. His parents wasted no time and called paramedics, but when the emergency medical personnel arrived on scene, they refused to give Bobby any treatment, claiming that he was simply intoxicated and there was no medical emergency. Bobby's parents pleaded with them to help, but the EMTs refused to even help Bobby onto a stretcher. It was just like touching him would be a death sentence for them. Bobby's parents had to lift their own son into a waiting taxi so they could take him to a nearby hospital for treatment. At the hospital, doctors took the same views as the EMTs and falsely deduced that Bobby was drunk. However, a subsequent medical exam showed that his blood alcohol content was just less than 0.02%, meaning Bobby was well within the drunk driving limit. For all intents and purposes, Bobby was sober as a judge. So why was he having such an adverse reaction to whatever he drank? Thankfully, doctors had Bobby stay overnight so they could monitor his condition, and over the next 8 hours or so he slowly recovered. But Jennifer Drinkwine is convinced that her son would have died if she hadn't gone back to that bar to check on him. The trying to make out like these kids are reckless, she said, but the not so. Something else is going on here. Then just a few months later, in January of 2017, Jennifer Santo and her family were staying at an all-inclusive resort in Tulum. Neither Jennifer nor her family had heard any stories of counterfeit alcohol or tourists blacking out, and naturally spent their first full day in Mexico sunning themselves by the pool and drinking at the swimmer bar. Not long into their afternoon of doggy paddling and cocktails, the Santo kids noticed that their parents were acting a little out of character. They seemed extremely drunk, despite having only a few glasses of Purple Rain, then began vomiting and blacking out after being escorted back to their rooms. Obviously, the incident was pretty much identical to the others that had occurred, but in this case, Jennifer Santo was able to provide some crucial insight into the nature of the blackouts. When I woke up at 7 p.m., it was an instant awakening, she said. It was like when I woke up from anesthesia after my gallbladder surgery. It's different than waking up from sleep or with a hangover, and I suspect that we were drugged. The various media outlets reached out to the resort in question, who admitted they were aware of the incidents given their public nature, but they also say that a number of investigations into potential foul play have brought up nothing. This is a stark contrast with reports that the Mexican police have had to shut down half a dozen black market tequila distilleries owned and operated by the cartel that are thought to have produced hundreds of thousands of gallons of counterfeit alcohol. But what makes this counterfeit alcohol so dangerous is that it's produced with a substance known as methanol, sometimes known as its other name, wood alcohol. Methanol is a solvent more commonly found in things like windshield washer fluid, and even in the smallest of doses can prove to be extremely toxic. What we appear to be looking at as a huge cartel conspiracy to flood the Mexican market with counterfeit tequila, and the unwillingness of authorities to deal with the complaints of tourists is down to the very tangible threat of torture, death, and disappearance. The terrifying truth of the matter is that thanks to the Mexican cartel, you could take a shot of tequila at a Mexican resort and not know it's the real McCoy or something considerably more deadly.
The new house on the Edmonton. We will call it the new house. The house is quite old, older than one can imagine it to be. But it is called the new house as every month there is a new family that comes to live in that house, and every month they move away. The new house on the Edmonton is a place that you definitely want to stay away from. It has been more of a fun experience for us as a neighborhood watching all these families get spooked out and leaving too soon. But for us, it has been hilarious trails to see them all go. All families leaving one by one. Was the house haunted? Yes, it was. But why were we not bothered by it? Well, the answer was clear when the Donald family moved here. As per routine, the first day of Donald family was calm and collective, and then, the very next day, they saw their first apparition in the house, and the second day, things were moving fast for them. The Donalds were a weird bunch. They almost had no luggage when they came to the place. The first step they took was completely make it different. The things were placed different, and they were in some very weird things. And we realized there was something more to them, and we soon realized it. The second week during midnight, they did the ceremony of catching a ghost. They made sure that somebody watched so they could set up the live stream, and as they did, they continued the ceremony. And when they did, they turned out to smoke a weird herb, and what it did was mellowed the ghost, and it fell and rolled out over the front. They quickly jumped out on the ghost, and after a while, they revealed the true identity of the ghost.
It was the real estate agent who would try to lure all these people out so he can scam them and the company could get commissions from the house. It was the most hilarious scam we ever saw in the neighborhood, and we were sorry for those poor souls who fell for the stupid joke. Everybody still talks about people who fell for the ghost in the new house.
Going back many, many years for this, I grew up in Northern California in a quite poor rural area. Some of my best friends from elementary and middle school lived like 10 to 15 miles away. So on weekends, instead of just going over to visit for the day, we'd have sleepovers to save our parents driving on these crazy road trips. So I had this one friend called Star, whose parents were like old school hippies. Their house always smelled of patchouli, and they were vegan even before vegan was even really a thing. Aside from a few unusual recreational activities, they were basically just as good as being parents as any other couple. They were sweet, loving, and attentive, and I always had a ball whenever I went to sleep over at their place, mainly because they let us stay outdoors in a tent at night, which was just a huge adventure for a little group of preteen tomboys. Anyways, this one night we were staying in a tent in the backyard, but it was a backyard that extended to one side of the house where we camped, and it is in the view of the TV room window, so Star's mom and dad could keep an eye on us. But it also meant we could see the driveway from the flap of our tent. It was summertime, and so it was still incredibly warm at night. We ended up leaving the tent flat and unzipped to let some cool air in. It obviously wasn't open all the way because of the bugs, but we can still see outside the tent. And then, in the middle of the night, Star shakes me up, wakes me, and whispers, "There's someone in the driveway." I am thinking it might have been her big brother, who was a few years older than us and was attending college. But when I suggested that, she said, "No, it's a bunch of people. Look." I start getting real anxious hearing that, so I quietly creep up to the tent flat to peek out, and that's when I saw that Star was exactly right. In the little bit of moonlight that we had, I literally lost count of the number of people I saw creeping up her driveway. It was seriously one of the scariest moments of my life, mainly because there was absolutely nothing to do but keep it quiet as possible. We couldn't call the cops. This was way before cell phones. We couldn't warn Star's parents without revealing our presence. We were just powerless, forced to watch people who obviously didn't have good intentions slowly approaching Star's house. I think in the end, Star just broke, and in a move you could either call it real brave or real stupid, she just ran out of the tent shouting, "Get away from my house! Mom, Dad, call the cops!" As soon as she starts screaming, a bunch of flashlights burst into life, obviously held by the guy sneaking up the driveway. And oh my god, there were so many of them. At first glance in the darkness, it looked no more than about 5 or 6 people, but when they all turned their flashlights on, it was clear the number was no more than like 15 or 20. I just hear sheriffs saying, "Show me your hands." And that was incredibly confusing, because we were all about calling the cops to get help, but like the cops were already here. Anyways, Star did as she was told, and so did me and my other friends. We start climbing out of our tent with our hands in the air. That was when the person approaching us started saying, "Jesus, they're just kids, man." And with them being closer, I could see that they really were cops with caps and badges and all the patches on their arms and all that stuff. I heard, "Go, go, go, get in there." And the cops started bashing the front door to the house. Other cops gathered around the backyard and headed towards one of the barns. We were scared, obviously, but more so focused on just staying down and watching. We were not really freaking out too bad, but when the cops started dragging Star's mom and dad out of the house and arresting them, she had to be restrained by the cop that was guarding us. After that, the cops drove me and our friends back to our respective homes. Then I don't know what they did with Star. I think they took her to her grandma's or aunt's or whatever. But then a few days later, we found out that Star's mom and dad had been growing something they shouldn't have in one of their barns. I get that it was illegal and stuff, but the aftermath was just so sad. Star had to go and live with her relatives because her parents were sent off to prison for a few years. It was messed up, and I get that the cops are just doing their job and stuff, but it was definitely one of the scariest times of my life, seeing all those figures in black just creeping towards my friend's house. Way back in the early 2020, I was doing pretty badly financially. I was behind on my rent, my hours at my job had just been cut, and almost all my money was being funneled into vet bills for my cat, who thankfully fully recovered from the surgery. But then boom, the pandemic hit, and it was devastating. You see, I live out here in California, where the restrictions have been particularly harsh, and they were most definitely at the harshest during the summer of 2020. When I lost my job, I would claim unemployment, but when it came to my apartment, I decided it would just be better to find an alternative form of accommodation for a while. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I started living in my car. It sucked, just as hard as you can imagine. And as a result, I only lasted about 10 days before I just threw into the town, moved back in with my parents up near Eugene. But in those 10 days, I had some seriously freaky stuff happen to me. Probably the most unexpected and therefore the creepiest was somewhere I least expected it. So just for clarity's sake, I am a girl in my early 20s, not particularly tall, not particularly strong, and after searching for a relatively safe place to park up every night, I ended up finding a quiet little cul-de-sac that seemed as safe as far as any I knew to park up and get some sleep. Best thing about it was almost office spaces, so I could just take up empty spaces at night and then leave before anyone showed up to complain. The only active place was all-night McDonald's, and I always figured it was a good place to park near, since there was food, coffee, and a bathroom to wash up. And so before one night, before I am about to sleep, I feed my cat and check my surroundings to make sure it's pretty much all clear. The only person around was a guy sitting at the outdoor seating at McDonald's. But he's not looking at me, not doing anything remotely creepy, so I figured it was safe to go to sleep. I don't even know how much time passed before I wake up to the sound of Oscar yelling. I figured it might be another cat outside, so I tell him to be quiet. But he won't, and he kept yelling, then hissing at something. The moment I opened my eyes, I knew something was wrong. I parked in the same place every night, slept in almost the same position every night, and the position I slept in meant there was always this annoying beam of light coming in through my window from the McDonald's across the street. So when I opened my eyes, I was immediately half blinded by the floodlight. I knew something was up close against my car, and then when I looked, I swear, a legitimate chill went up my spine. Some guy, and I don't know if he was the same one who was eating, was pressed right up against the glass, hands around his eyes like goggles so he can see into the dark car, and he's just staring directly at me. He didn't look particularly scary. I think he just had a dark color windbreaker on, and I know he had short, neatly cropped hair. It looked so normal, but it wasn't so much about how he looked, but it was about the way he was looking at me. Eyes all wide, a slight curl to his lips, almost like he's thinking of all the possibilities that come from having found a vulnerable sleeping girl. The fact that Oscar was ready to claw his face off didn't seem to faze him. He was just fixated on one thing, and one thing alone. Me. I swear to God, no one ever made me feel like that, ever. Not before that night, not after either. It's like he didn't see me as a person, or like he found a $20 bill on the floor, something he could just take. Luckily, I kept all my doors locked, so there was no danger of him getting into the car unless he broke a window. But he didn't make it any less frightening when he was leaning up, looking around, and suddenly tried to open one of my car doors. I grabbed my phone setup and started screaming for him to get away from my car, saying that I was going to call the cops and I'm calling 911 right now. At that, he just started walking away from the car like nothing had happened. I saw two people stop and say something to him on the way into the McDonald's, but he just shrugged it off, walked into the darkness, and disappeared. By the time the cops showed up, he was long gone. And it wasn't like he had committed any real crime to file a report. But still, the cop was really understanding and told me I'd done the right thing, but also advised me to scout out some other potential sleeping situation. And they were definitely not the most helpful cops I've ever dealt with, but the guy who took my report was really understanding. Unlike his cold partner, who I swear was only moments away from rolling his eyes at me. That was the worst thing about living in my car. People treat you like a human being until the very second you let it slip out. And then it's like a race to find out what's wrong with you. Drugs, mental breakdown, scandalous divorce. Oh, and always has to be something negative. Too, like, I just can't be down on my luck because of a freaking global pandemic. Not everyone was like that, but were enough to make it a problem. So please, homeless people need a lot of things. Compassion, financial, and moral support. But they definitely don't need your judgment.
When the event I'm about to share happened, I was 20 years old. And I'm sharing it because I know I'm not the only guy who has gone through it. I also know that as a guy, these types of experiences can leave one feeling confused, embarrassed, or worse. Now, my mother used to be a manager at a henhouse grocery store in the city where I was born and raised. When a job opening became available in the deli, she offered the position to me, so I took it. And I was working with 3 other people, one of which I became fast friends with. His name was Alvin, and he had moved to the Midwest from Louisiana. I forgot exactly what he said had happened, but the gist of it was that he had gotten into some trouble back home, and his mom asked Alvin's brother if he could come and stay with him. When I met Alvin's older brother, I was excited to find out that he worked as a sheriff's deputy in the county I lived in. I had planned to become a police officer myself once I turned 21, so having Alvin's older brother as a sort of mentor made it seem all the more possible. One night, I heard the honk of a car horn in front of my home. Peeking out the window, I recognized the car to be Alvin's brother's unmarked sheriff's vehicle. It was only 1 minute from the grocery store and 5 minutes from his house, so it didn't seem all that out of place. But I was a bit confused as to why he stopped by so late. To be honest, I was kind of hoping he would invite me for a ride-along, which is where a civilian rides shotgun with an on-duty police officer to learn more about what law enforcement does. When I got to the car, he told me to hop in, so I was up. I asked Alvin went to some rave out in the country somewhere, and I'm worried about him, so I want to go get him, he answered. I just wanted to swing by and ask if he wanted to ride along and help me search for the location. Yeah, sure. I said it was so long. I can't really remember how long we drove around, but where my mother and I lived was already on the edge of the city, so getting to the rural parts wouldn't have taken that long. However, he did drive a way out, and the darkness swallowed everything that was illuminated by the car's headlights. I had attended many raves in my teens, so I do remember finding it odd that a rave would be held in the rural area we were in. Then at some point, Alvin's brother said, "You know I love you, right?" Now, I was far from an innocent kid growing up, so I was immediately suspicious of this off-the-wall question, whatever it was. "Yeah, bro, you're a good friend," I answered, emphasizing the words bro and friend. "Nah, you don't get it," he replied, in a way that sounded frustrated. "I'm in love with you." He continued emphasizing the words in love. This isn't good. A voice screamed in my head. I sort of glanced at his service weapon on his head pod to the corner of my eye and thought, this is really bad. Then I noticed the car began to slow down, and I looked over at Alvin's brother, who was staring at me, the car now moving at a crawl. "Look," he began, "I'll take care of you. I got a lot of money, so I can buy you a car or house, whatever you want. Just let me have you." This time,
the voice in my head wouldn't stop screaming. My heart was pounding, and sweat began to slowly drip down my face. I'm not like that, bro, I tried to explain. You know, I have a permanent girlfriend. I'm not like that. Now the car wasn't moving, and though it was inky dark around us, light from the car's instrument panel only glowed a little, and I was able to see the scowl on his face. Well, it seems the rave may have already shut down, he said after what seemed like an hour of sitting in the middle of a dark rural road in awkward silence. He then pulled a U-turn and began heading back in the direction we had just come. And thank God. I finally arrived home after maybe a 45-minute drive of silence and awkwardness. As we pulled up in front of my house, I went to open the door and get out, but felt his hand grab my forearm. If you tell anyone about this, just remember. He trailed off as if thinking twice about what he was about to say. And then he let my arm go, and I got out of his car. I shut the door and never turned to look back. I just wanted to get inside my house as fast as I could and lock the door. I never saw or heard from Alvin's brother again after that, and I'm glad. This happened nearly a decade ago. At the time of the story, I was 15, male, 5'5", and 132 pounds. I was a wrestler, so I always knew my exact weight and kept myself extremely lean, but still had a fairly muscular build. I lived in a fairly small town of about 50 to 60,000 people, and in my off-season, I did whatever I could do to become somewhat active than outside. I had a friend, we'll call him Blaze, who was really into disc golf and always asked me to come play with him and smoke a doobie while we were in the most secluded parts of the course. He was a couple of years older than me, but no bigger than I was, just not so great of an influence for me at the time. This small town only had 2 disc golf courses, one at a very public park near middle school, or one at the edge of town and an older park that was much bigger. Obviously, we weren't smoking for everyone to see. Little did I know, on that Thursday afternoon, that this park happened to be my town's hotspot for people meeting and hooking up in the parking lot. I live in the Midwest in the US, so there weren't a lot of, young, stylish, pretty guys. It's mostly guys aged 30 and 50, pretty big and bulky and country looking. So we finished the course in the joint, walked out of the woods, anything but sober. We typically either just chilled in the grass or played catch after we finished up, until my buddy was more normal and ready to drive back. We noticed that there were way more cars in the parking lot that we got there, and a lot of older guys sitting on trunks of their cars or on tailgates loosely grouped together. This very large hairy man in a tank top and his tall thin friend dressed like a biker gang member started to do the wolf whistle toward me and my friend. I got pretty uncomfortable, not because a man whistled at me, but because we had to walk in their direction and I could feel the eyes have way more guys on me than I wanted. For a testosterone-filled weight room junkie teenager, I did not feel very safe here knowing that there were at least 30 guys in this group, and I can see in my peripheral that a very large portion were eyeing us closely as we walked toward the parking lot. I'll make it clear that I'm not a fighter, and I would never intend to hurt anyone aside from self-defense, but I was definitely confident in myself to hold someone off. Us too. We're just so outnumbered and not in a sober state of mind, so anxiety made things much worse. A couple of them said some gross catcall things, more whistles, and then woo-woo noises that rednecks like to make when they're excited about something, or instigating similar to woo, but if Eric Cartman screeched it. I think they had the idea that we were some people that met online and we were coming to meet up, being, hi, I didn't care what was going on. I just wanted to be safe and not the center of attention. When we got closer, the big hairy man who did the first wolf whistle said something like, "You think you can handle this?" I just mumbled, "No thanks," and tried to keep walking. He yelled back, "Who was that boy?" To which I just clearly, "No thanks." Not into it. He seemed offended and angry. Said, "Not into what?" I said I was sorry, I'm not gay. And he seemed to be offended by that word. Again, asked me to repeat myself in a very aggressive tone. So I corrected myself and said, "I'm just not into guys." Things escalated from here very quickly. The man stepped forward from leaning against a truck and grabbed my wrist. He said, "Well, we can fix that real quick." Don't get excited. I didn't do some cool fight move to attack him. Just a simple wrist roll and using that momentum, a quick push of the elbow to turn him around so that he would have his back to me and I could get by without him anymore. He responds, touches me like that again, and we'll get the both of you. Another guy made his way over to Blaze, who was much less common shrill type of stoner than I was. I can only describe what he did as one of those kicks or sidesteps off of a wall, but to that guy's chest and abdomen. He started to run and yell F off as loud as possible. Very quickly, bunches of guys began to stand up from their seats on the outside of their cars and motion our direction. I started booking it for the car too, and the Mr. Skinny biker type man was running right after us. Thank God it was just him running and not multiple chasing us, or the story might be different. I was faster than Blaze, so I got ahead of him and pictured us running across the parking lot to his truck that was facing us backing into the stall. I got around to the passenger side quickly, with Blaze still about 100 feet from the truck. He tried to cut to the rights and make it to the driver's side of this little stint, but the skinny guy cut him off and sent him to the left passenger side. I ran around the back of the truck as fast as I could to the driver door, and Blaze slid his key around the roof towards me. I hopped in, well aware that I did not want to be driving right now in this state of mind, much less in such a crazy situation, and even more or less, someone else's vehicle. Still, without thinking, I started that skirt out of the parking lot while Skinny banged on the bed of the truck chasing. But that wasn't the end. A truck and a car on the way right behind me. Skinny jumped into the car that was in the back, and the chase began. Terrified and still high. I cut through the grass in the park to get to the main road more quickly, thinking I would lose them that way. These guys raced over the speed bumps and around the bends in the park road right up to the main road, and they were driving so fast, I would have gotten T-boned if I didn't smash the pedal to the floor at the same time. I'm so stressed, I started silently crying while driving. Think of how horrible the possibility could be contact, whereas know that when your eyes are dry from the smoke, then they rapidly get moist. Contacts tend to drift to bits until they find their place again. This is definitely not ideal for someone with awful vision driving twice the speed limit down the road in the middle of town. So I started turning down residential streets and weaving in and out, being tapped on the shoulder by Blaze to keep my speed up, because the two were still on the rear bumper. I even made some risky U-turns that they followed right along. This chase lasted over 10 minutes of me frantically driving through main streets, residential back alleys, and everything I could try to get away. I was so scared. The best case scenario ended up not getting pulled over, and myself obtaining a permanent record by DUI by the ripe age of 15. Luckily, a stroke of luck and a surprisingly quick reflex came to my aid. Blaze yelled "cop" and pointed to a parking lot to our left, where there were police cruisers probably just waiting to catch someone speeding or running red lights. On the semi-busy road we ended up on, I whipped into the parking lot and parked a couple of stalls down from the cop. The truck prepared to turn, but stopped in the middle of the road. So quickly, once he realized what was going on, that the car followed him, had to swerve and pop a curve, catching the officer's attention. He backed out, and the two vehicles split different ways and were out of sight before he got out of the parking lot. Never went back to that park any time other than the mornings after that. So thankfully that nothing bad came out of the incident, and we made it out completely unscathed. No idea what they would have done, but people were engaging teenagers in a car chase could not have had good intentions in mind. It's my first time in my life being harassed like that too. You would think being in a car chase might be fun or exciting, but I just felt so powerless and like I had no control. Like nothing I could do would both get these guys away from us and simultaneously not get me arrested. I used to love Valentine's Day. I used to love all the cutesy displays and Valentine's-themed stock items we put out in the Walmart I worked at. And I used to love picking out something special for my boyfriend after planning a little date night with him. But we're not together anymore, and I'm not much of a romantic these days either. In fact, I dread February 14 coming around each year because it reminds me of one of the single worst moments in my entire life. So like I said, I worked at Walmart when this all happened, and it actually happened in the store too. I loved the decorating and checking out the romantic stocks that we gotten in that year, but I usually tried to get Valentine's Day off, or if I was working at Tide, trade shifts with a coworker. With this one year, I can't get off, and no one would trade with me, and so I was stuck working 8 till 5 on Valentine's Day, but it's no big loss. I can wait for my presents, and me and my boyfriend arranged to do something after work anyway, so I took it on the chin. Written after I finished my lunch break, I happened to be walking by one of the Valentine's Day displays when I see this older guy staring at some of the items. I thought it was the cutest thing ever. This sweet older gentleman looking to pick his wife up something romantic. Or maybe he had his eye on someone in the nursing home he was at. Either way, was super adorable to me. So I saddled up to the old guy and asked him who the lucky lady is. He's all startled for a moment, again, kind of super cute, and has to compose himself before he gives me his answer. There was no one special in his life. He was just something of an old romantic, and seeing cutesy displays like ours on Valentine's Day made him long for his lost loves of his. I remember he said that. I then asked if he had his eye on anyone new, and he starts talking in a way I found kind of confusing at first. Like I thought I may have misunderstood, maybe lost the context a little bit. After a minute of him just sort of babbling, I realize he's not making any sense at all. He keeps skipping from thought to thought, just like a stream of broken consciousness coming out of him. It was right about then that it hit me that he wasn't all there. That was about the time that I realized he wasn't that old either. I mean, all his hair was gray. He had like an old man jumper on, but he was so animated when he talked. He seemed sort of spry, like full of nervous energy. And at a push, I'd say he was in his mid-50s. But something about him just seemed off, and I was starting to think that initiating conversation hadn't been the best idea on my part. I wish him luck with who the lucky lady turns out to be, then slowly make a move to walk away. But he stops me. Not with a word. I mean, he physically stops me from walking away. He didn't grab me or anything at first. It was just his fingers that gently half wrapped around my wrist. But it was enough to really put me on edge. And then he asked me in a way that seemed both extremely childlike and extremely sinister both at the same time. Be my Valentine. It was so surreal that initially I thought he had to be joking. Like no sane person would ask anyone that in a serious way. Not like that anyway. So I just sort of laugh it off before apologizing and letting him know that I was seeing someone and read as I do. I try to pull my wrist out of his hand. He tightens it, wraps his entire fist around my wrist and squeezes. I just froze for a moment. In almost 2 years of working at that Walmart, I've never had so much as an issue with a customer. Maybe it's because I'm short and blonde. Maybe it's because I'm just lucky because that whole interaction went from 0 to 100 so fast, and given my total lack of experience in any kind of conflict management, I just had no idea what to do. So I froze. The guy starts turning red in the face and he continues to squeeze my wrist as hard as he could. There are veins bulging and it's his neck. He's trembling so hard. His eyes are starting to water and he is strong, like really freaking strong. Then what he did next haunted me for months afterwards. He gets his face right in mine, while I'm absolutely frozen in terror, and starts singing. He tried to keep his voice down, but he couldn't get the words out without his words trembling from whatever weird rage fit he was going through. After 2 lines, I just started screeching for help. But as soon as I start making any noise, one of those hands shoot up around my throat and pushes me back hard against the shelf. And then he starts squeezing. I stop being able to scream. Then one of his other hands goes somewhere else. Somewhere I really wish he hadn't put it. But when he did, I finally found the strength to really fight back. But it was over moments later. Some other customers come barreling down the aisle when he heard my scream and tackled the guy so hard that he almost floored me too. And if the guy seemed crazy before he got tackled, afterward he turned into a full-blown lunatic. He actually beat the guy who first got him down. And if it wasn't for security showing up as quick as they did, I think he might have actually gotten free. He was legitimately frothing at the mouth by the time the cops showed up. I've never seen a person look like that before. That guy was more animal than man by that point, and the fallout was huge. Walmart sent me to some trauma management thing that didn't help at all, and sent emails around to the other associates, promising they'd do better with security and stuff. But it was all just for show. I gave statements to the police too, and for a while, it looked like I'd have to go to court to testify against the guy that assaulted me. But as it turned out, he was found unfit to stand trial on. Instead of going to real prison, he ended up in some state hospital somewhere else. When it was all said and done, I just tried to get over it. It was one of the most horrific moments in my life, sure, but I refused to let it define me. And for a long while, I worked on my overall mental health, and particularly my sense of self-esteem. I thought I was good at that. I thought it was fixed. So there was no way of me anticipating what would happen when I met a friend at this 50s diner that was our favorite place to eat. We're just sitting there, conversation on hold while we eat, and the song comes on. In the old jukebox until the lyrics started, everything was fine. But then these 2 girls started singing some words that I thought I'd gotten out of my head completely. I know you belong to somebody new, but to Nines, you belong to me. I recognized it instantly from the weird little changes in pitch in the girls' voices, but it was the exact same song the guy in Walmart had sung before he grabbed me. I know I caused a bit of a scene when I got up and fast walked out of there, and my friend calling me after, but honestly didn't care. I couldn't breathe. Well, that song was my ears. I just couldn't be there. I suppose trauma is weird like that. No matter how much you think you have it under control, it's still there, bubbling away just beneath the surface. But I do work at it, and I managed to neutralize how that creepy old song made me feel too. I mean, it took a while, but I managed it. Like I said, I'm not going to let what happened define me, and I'll wear my wounds with pride. But Valentine's Day is most definitely ruined for me.
So this story is so cliche and ridiculous that no one ever believes it's real. Except for the people that were there. It was Halloween 2012, my senior year of high school. I went to a Catholic school, so we always had the day off after Halloween because it's considered a church holiday. So my friends would game to start our weekend early. One night, where we didn't go to the parties, we usually did the same thing together. We'd sit on my front step for a couple of hours and joke around. Then we would walk the neighborhood and usually end up at this crappy pizza place across town because the prices were so low. Since a friend of us had recently broken up with our girlfriends, we went in much of a party mood, so we did our usual. It was around 10:30 at night, and the pizza joint was closing up. There were 3 of us, me, my friend Pat, and my friend Jack. We finished our food, refilled our drinks, and headed out to get back to my house. On the way, we had to cross this large mall parking lot. It's about 4 football fields long and 2 wide. I should mention at this point that we weren't dumb, naive kids. We'd all grown up in the city and had our fair share of urban experiences. All 3 of us were pretty streetwise, and we're competent out on the street by ourselves,
But we had experienced something that night that we were totally not prepared for. So we were walking through this parking lot, and it was absolutely desolate, not a soul in sight, when suddenly we saw a white tradesman van creeping slowly behind us about 100 yards back. I know the old white van cliche, but I swear this is a real story. I pointed it out to my friends, and we picked up our pace. We put the collars on our jackets and hunched our shoulders to make us seem a bit bigger than we were. And in an instant, the van sped up and cut off our path. Everything in the van was pitch black, so we couldn't see any people. And that was when someone yelled out in a non-threatening voice, "Hey man, happy Halloween! You guys like Halloween?" Despite the jovial manner in which this was said, a van doesn't cut you off in a parking lot unless it has bad intentions. We had nowhere to go. We couldn't run, but they're in a van. They would catch up to us easily, and we'd have to turn our backs to them. He said again, "Hey man, you guys like Halloween?" I responded, trying to sound tough. "Yes, it's over now, so we're heading home and you're in our way." "Now dude, Halloween is over. We still got tons of candy in there." The tone suddenly shifted, and we still couldn't see anyone in the van. The three of us puffed out a chest and got ready for a fight. After a brief silence that felt like it dragged on for hours, Jack cuts the tension by surely saying, "Listen, dickhead, I don't know what you're thinking about to do, but if you don't leave, you're gonna get your ass kicked." Once he'd said that, the back door of the van swung open, and two very tall men stepped out. They had black suits with black leather gloves and were well built and strong looking. But the most menacing thing was that they were both wearing these cheap Mitt Romney masks. That's when we realized this wasn't a Halloween prank. At that moment, all three of us went to take off, but the van started driving circles around us. There was no place for us to go. We had no idea how we were going to get out of this situation, and I had no idea what these guys were planning to do with three 18-year-old men. But they seemed like they knew what they were doing. We were all getting ready for the fight of our lives, but then the van stopped, and it looked like they were about to make their move. That was it. I mentioned that there was three of us that night. It was at this moment that my other friend, Pat, the one that had stayed silent until this point, leaned into both of us and quietly said this a Hail Mary. "But get ready to run when I say go, all right?" He then picked up one of our sodas and threw it at all his might at the driver's side window. The window was open, and the cup miraculously connected with the driver's head. Pat then screamed run, and we took off across the parking lot. The van squealed off in the other direction, and we hurried our asses home. Jack and I were both confused as to why a simple cup of soda got them to give up on their plans. Then we found out what actually happening. While we were panicking, Pat kept his cool. He nonchalantly dumped out his drink and slipped a big-ass rock into his cup. Then he waited for the right moment. The driver, thinking that this kid had just thrown a drink at him, wound up getting pegged in the head with a rock. It probably knocked him out cold, or at least brought us enough time to put up distance between us. All that was left after that was pulling off a miracle and getting the rock to hit. Maybe a guardian angel or God himself took care of that. I'm still amazed by it. But the moral of the story, kids, don't panic when you're in a tight spot. If you lose your cool, you lose the fight.
It was an early Easter morning at David's household. People were getting ready to have a gathering at their homes, and kids were especially excited for the Easter festivities to begin. Aunt Genuine had set up a table for all the kids. The eggs were all assembled there, and the paints were all set. She was ready to sit with the children and paint the eggs however they liked. She was looking forward to all the different ideas the kids in the house would share with her. Paul and Cliff were already out and arranging the whole barbecue and a little PlayStation for the kids that were going to arrive. Georgina was busy preparing all the food and arranging the snacks and drinks. Malcolm, who also was the youngest of the three brothers, didn't arrive yet. He was a detective. The David family in the suburban of New York was an upbeat big joint family of three brothers and their family, and the house was always filled with the noises of children. The suburban American lifestyle that everybody wanted, their end goal to be, was achieved by the Davids. Malcolm was the youngest. He was the detective at the local police department, and the other was Paul David. He was a stockbroker at the New York Stock Exchange. And then there was Cliff David, the investment banker. So as far as the career choices of Davids go, Paul and Cliff were bringing in a whole lot of money, and that was the initial reason they got to move out to the suburbia. Aunt Genuine was their only sister, and probably was the kindest of all. She was a teacher at a local school, and was highly regarded in the community due to her behavior. David was highly regarded in the area, and even helped out everyone when they got the chance. It was rare for someone in their position to be this kind, and people around them were happy. Paul and Cliff both had their children, and were both divorced. They got custody of the children, and some even say that it was Cliff who run some contacts to win the custody. But nothing bad was said about them because of their kindness and constant help they gave the community. They were holding the annual Easter egg hunting in their backyard and were very excited about it. A lot of children from the local community were there, and they were all excited to see all the fun activities that David had for them. All the kids that entered were provided a bib to keep things running smoothly. A big lunch for everyone in town was arranged, and everyone mingled and talked about anything and everything. A whole lot of kids were found egg hunting and were enjoying the event. The whole Easter went up smoothly, and then later on, when all the kids were called into the front gate, a number of them lined up with all the eggs they had found. Every single kid was there. But there was no sign of Paul's son and Cliff's son. They went to look for them, as they thought they might have been doing the egg hunting still. They looked everywhere. There was no sign of both the boys in the radius of the event. They decided to call the police, and the event was brought to a halt. Every guest was thoroughly questioned, and no one knew anything about the boys. The police were scared about losing light, and they know that once it got dark, it would become difficult to find the children. Then, one of the kids that were egg hunting with the boys told what happened, and he told the police that a big rabbit took both the boys with them. Malcolm decided to take the lead on the case and officially declared it the case of kidnapping. He knew that every moment is precious, so he put on a call for search and issued a judge-signed an order to search the area under the radius of 10 kilometers and even to cease and arrest anyone dressed in a rabbit suit. And there were a lot of people who were dressed as a rabbit, and the closest was the local boy who was dressing up as the rabbit in their party. Malcolm started to interrogate him, and the boy explained that how could have he kidnapped the boys if he was right here at the party? By logic, Malcolm agreed. The boy then acknowledged Malcolm and the tense situation he was in. Paul and Cliff were both keeping this under the house for now, and they didn't want in any way to get the press involved, so they kept checking in with Malcolm on the process. Search team had no update, and the forest area was being searched down by everyone in town. Paul didn't want his wife to get involved, so he never told her about the kidnapping. Cliff, on the other hand, decided to call in the wife. She was scared and angry, and pleaded for Malcolm to find them soon. Malcolm was losing light, so he called in reinforcements and decided to do an air search over the forest. The search was now unsuccessful. It started raining. The helicopter was called off, and the forest was now getting denser and darker to search in. The search was not being held off. Everyone out of their town they're willing to look for the kids regardless of the weather. And now, as the time was moving forward, the search was put on hold. Everyone returned from their search in the forest. Everyone stood by their side all the time, and there was not a single person in the community that wasn't willing to do everything possible. The night passed, and everyone was still wide awake and everything they could. Malcolm decided to do a run-through for every dress vendor in the block to see all the other rabbit costume rentals. One by one, they started interrogating everyone who had the rabbit dress on, but there was no luck. Everyone's alibi checked out. There was no clue to as who was the giant rabbit who took the kids. They decided to another full sweep of the house, and surprisingly in the basement, found another rabbit costume. They decided to send it to the forensics to get the prints, and prints they found didn't match anyone in the system, and so the next suspects were the people in the house the other day. There were only 3 people who had the access to the basement: Paul, Genuine, Malcolm. And weirdly, none of them seemed to be the suspect. But Malcolm still decided to get everyone's prints. 3 days had gone by. There was no clue to as where the kids were. They waited for the results on the prints on the costume found in the basement. It wasn't a match, meaning there was a 4th person inside their basement. They were clueless about the intruder because of the event. In a surprising turn of events, one of the dry cleaners who rented the rabbit costume noticed an irregularity in his ledger. He said that the guy who was the Easter rabbit at David's party had rented out 2 different costumes. Malcolm showed the photogenic evidence of the costume found in the basement and showed it to the shopkeeper. He confirmed that it was the same costume. Malcolm was pissed that he let the man slip right under his fingers. They put an APB on the man and issued a nationwide arrest for the man. 3 days later, the guy was found in an alleyway in a completely different state. He was planning on escaping the country. He was questioned after he was brought in. He agreed to have kidnapped the children, but he said that all he did was hand out the children to a woman. The description of the woman matched that of Paul's wife. Their doubt became clear, and maybe the reason why she never called him back when Paul tried to inform him about the lost children. Malcolm took a SWAT team and decided to raid her house, but to his surprise, the house was empty. The case twisted itself even more. They brought in surveillance tape from every bus station, every railway station, and the airport to see if they ever left the state. But there was no luck. Paul suggested Malcolm look for them at the family cabin in the forest up north. They decided to move, and it turned out to be an inn lead. There was no one, but the ash in the fireplace seemed recent, and Malcolm ordered an aerial thermal search of the area to get all sort of heat signature. 2 hours after the big search, the helicopter picked up 3 heat signals, and it was from inside of the river. Their biggest fear was now coming alive. The rescue team and the paramedics were called. After an hour, body of one female that matched the descriptions of Paul's wife was found tied to that of 2 boys who matched the description of both Paul's son and Cliff's son. And from her legs were tied to a lot of bricks. They were drained out of blood from previously inflicted wounds, and later on in reports, turned out the kids were dead before they were drowned, but the woman, on the other hand, died because of drowning. Upon searching, a suicide note was recollected blaming Paul for the suicide. Paul could not bear this pain, and he was found hanging in his room a day later. Cliff was destroyed, and the Davids was not the same happy family they once were. Malcolm took on drinking and failed throughout his career and was later on suspended. The terrible suicide distraught the family, or that was what it seemed to them, until the same case was called in on Easter next year. It was the Fowlers this time. What seemed like suicide was now a case of a serial killer. The case of Dav opened up again, and Malcolm was put in on the case. This is how the story of the Easter Bunny Killer started. So back in 2015, I was a freshman in high school. On one weekend, I went to go down to my friend Andrew's house to meet up with other friends to go into DC. We had a great time in DC, but now it was getting dark outside, so we all started getting back on one of the trains. At first, it was all nothing, not becoming unnerving at first until we stopped at the Bethesda station, and 4 guys came in. We're singing obnoxiously loud in the train and trying to intimidate people on the train. One of my friends, Gabby, was starting to get a bit scared. The loud singing woke up my friend Andrew. He immediately knew something was up, as all of my other friends knew as well. The final stop where we got off was the stop. The 4 guys got off as well, but they were ahead of us, so we thought that it was over. After that, we started heading toward the parking lot, but my friend's mom wasn't there to pick us up, so we all stood there to wait. We were all talking in a circle, then the 4 loud guys from earlier still walking towards us, but with more people this time. This now big group of people were walking around us and circling us, trying to intimidate us. We didn't know what was going to happen, so we all stood there just to wait for them to make the first move. This group started then trying another intimidation tactic, which was starting to low-key scare my friends Gabby and Kimmy, but we all didn't make the first move. They broke into our social circle, and we were getting close to all of us. Nevin was stepping on some of our shoes, and one of them said, "See, I like reading books." My friend Andrew was slowly pulling out, trying to hide the fact that he was pulling out a knife, and so was I. But one of them saw it. So we were expecting to have a fight start to happen. But thankfully, they all realized this possible robbery attempt might not be easy because some of us weren't going to go without a fight. Thankfully, they all started heading away. But it was still a very unnerving experience. About a week later, a local news station posted on Twitter that a man was beaten to death and robbed at the same metro station. I still wonder to this day if that was the same group of people we had encountered a couple of weeks prior.